This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at Kevin Kautzman and at Brad Kelly. All right, we're back with another action-packed, fun-filled, very dark, very moody, very southern episode of Art of Darkness. And I'm Kevin Kautzman, joined by my usual partner in crime, Brad Kelly. However, today we have a very special guest, a fellow writer named Aaron Gwyn. Brad, I'll let you introduce Aaron.
Yeah. So we realized a little late in life, Kevin and I realized that we don't know everything. So we thought we would.
What? That's maybe you do. You can't drop this on me during the mic's hot, Brad.
Existential crisis all of a sudden.
Okay.
So we wanted to bring in our good friend Aaron Gwyn. Aaron is a award-winning novelist, the author of, among other things, The World Beneath, Wind's War. Most recently, All God's Children. Which I read and is a certified banger, and also won the Oklahoma Book Award, I believe, this year or last year, and has received rave reviews all around. His work has also appeared in Esquire and a number of other journals, collections, and anthologies. This guy's out there doing the work for real. He also currently teaches creative writing at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And he knows more about our subject than probably Kevin and I put together. So we thought we'd bring him in and have a chat about, one of my favorite authors. Well,
excited to be here, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for being here, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Who are we going to talk about today?
I believe it's William Faulkner. I'm hearing Faulkner.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So Kevin, what do you know? The classic AoD question. What do you know about William Faulkner?
Oh, doggy. Whoa, Nelly. Great American novelist. Personally read quite a lot of Faulkner.
Okay.
Around 2008, 2009. After I had spent a little bit of time in England, I wanted to immerse myself in the American greats. Quintessential Southern author. I think Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yeah.
I associate him with Oxford, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And to be frank, much beyond that, beyond his outsized influence on American letters, I don't know a damned thing.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, that's all true. You said great American author, and I wanted to ask, great or greatest? He's in the running, that's for sure. Some of that boils down to taste, obviously, but he did it about as good as anybody. So let me give just quick bio, just put in place and time so we can kind of start filling in. And if we were doing this in true Faulknerian sense, we would just wander all over time and space for the next couple of hours and sort of at the end sort of just fall down. But he's born William how do you pronounce this? Cuthbert? Anybody know? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm going to say Cuthbert, William Cuthbert Faulkner, born without a U in the name, by the way. September 25th, 1897, dies July the 6th of 1962. Lived most of that life in Mississippi, despite many, many, many wanderings, a lot more wanderings of the world than I actually anticipated. So And stop me anywhere I get some stuff wrong, but I'm just going to lay out some bio information. I mean, one of the cool things, so Faulkner is known for, it took him a little while to get there, but settling into creating this literary world, this fictional county. And Aaron probably knows how to pronounce it because I tried my best and I can't pronounce. What is the name of the county?
Yoknapatawpha.
There we go.
This is why Aaron is here, among other reasons.
I came to pronounce made-up things.
Well, I listened to it pronounced several times earlier today and like practiced it, and I was like, I can't get it. It's tricky. So, fictional county, loosely based on it's I think Lafayette County, where Oxford is. So, you know, he did that thing that a lot of us writers do where you fictionalize stuff enough that you can get away with it.
That's right.
And then you also don't have to hew too closely to the truth when it comes to facts, right? So because he was so sort of entrenched in the soil, we got to talk about his sort of lineage a little bit, because he comes from quite interesting stock. Starting with his great-grandfather, who they called the Old Colonel. And the Old
Colonel
is
always great. That's good for
fantastic.
anybody. Right.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't involve fried chicken.
Right.
Yeah.
They might have based, the Colonel Sanders might have been based on this guy. He was, among other things... He was owner of what might have been the first a partial owner of what might have been the first railroad in Mississippi, right? So,
I think it's worth remembering too, as we sort of generally place ourselves into the 19th century. The railroad was the whiz bang internet of the time. That was whoa, we're moving across country in days rather than weeks.
Yeah,
it would have been big deal.
It would have been like starting the first internet service provider in your.
Right.
Amazing.
State or something like that, right? I mean,
people are hosting websites with spinning skulls and flames and everything's very hardcore.
Yeah.
We're taking the train to Mississippi.
Right. So the Old Colonel was in on that early business. He was also a Civil War officer. I'm going to kind of put that in quotes. He was what was referred to in the biography as a minor slave owner, which I don't know if that really gets you off the hook exactly. But
I don't know about that phrase. What does that really mean? That's
minor.
I don't think it's kind of an all or nothing. It's like a Boolean.
You either do or you don't, right?
It's like the phrase casual sex.
Yeah. Like being a little pregnant.
A little pregnant.
Right. Yeah.
There it isn't.
Okay. All right.
So anyway, I guess the point is he didn't own like a plantation with hundreds of, or whatever, but still.
Okay.
He was also a novelist. He had a fairly popular novel that he wrote. This is what Faulkner's great-grandfather, the Old Colonel, called The White Rose of Memphis, and it was like a romantic kind of escapade-y kind of thing. Right?
That's a lovely title.
It is a lovely title.
That's so 19th century.
Oh,
too.
yeah,
like
absolutely.
it's a Victorian. And his conception of himself, the White Rose of Memphis. I'm a literary figure now.
Right, exactly.
I was waiting for the accent to come out.
It comes.
Yeah, and this is some crazy old time. So there's a lot of violence in Faulkner's family history. So when WC, the Old Colonel, was young, he how did this go? So somebody tried to kill him. So he was in a group called the Knights of Temperance, which was like apparently was like a drinking club, but they were called the Knights of Temperance. And there was some guy, and this is when he was like in his 20s, there was some guy that they didn't let in, and there was an argument over it.
It's like I'm the chastity of screwing.
Right.
It's very funny. I like this. Yeah, right. Sure.
Yeah, and so this guy ends up trying to shoot the Old Colonel. Pulls out a gun
at the club.
I think outside the club or something like that, in the streets of Ripley, Mississippi. Pulls out the gun, pulls the trigger twice, doesn't go off. Old Colonel stabs the guy to death.
Whoa! To death?
Yeah.
So the colonel literally, well, he didn't dodge a bullet, but the machine was on the side of the White Rose of Memphis.
Well, had to bring William Faulkner into existence, you know?
Right? Yeah.
Sometimes
perhaps there's some gremlin in the gun that was literary.
Yeah.
This is an important lesson for us, right? Like a knife never jams, never misfeeds, never misfires.
It's true. And if you're going to shoot somebody who carries a big old knife, shoot him from a few steps away, you know?
get away. Get far enough the knife is not,
you got some range with it, you know?
There's a bit of like a slapstick quality to that, too. It's you pull the trigger a couple of times, it doesn't go off. The other guy pretty much has license to stab you to death.
Yeah, man.
Right, and the old colonel got off. Like, it wasn't like, you know, there was like, well, yeah, he tried to shoot you. What are you supposed to do?
There must have been witnesses.
Probably got a medal.
Probably. Well, the crazy thing is there would eventually be a statue of the old colonel in Ripley, Mississippi, an 8-foot tall bronze statue. People loved this guy so much. He was just such a crazy character. I said he was a Civil War officer, and I put it in quotation marks because he kind of joined the official Confederate Army, but he really just like started up his own thing and just like joined a battle, basically.
That's what a colonel is,
right?
Though.
Is it?
Right?
Oh,
it's like a colonel is, I think historically, and I'm not a military historian whatsoever, but my understanding is a colonel is something like a field general who has the ability to make executive decisions on the shifting battlefield.
My point was he just, I think, went around and like found some good old boys and we're like, let's go, you know?
Right.
The weird thing about this is a lot of these guys, when the war broke out, the CSA was so loosely affiliated that someone like Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a slave trader from this region, never served in the military, didn't know anything about warfare. He put an ad in the Memphis paper that says, if you want to whip up on the Yankees, come with me. And he outfitted a group of cavalry out of his own pocket and declared himself colonel and became Nathan Bedford Forrest.
You know, that's crazy. You know, as much as I'm not necessarily a fan of Nathan Bedford Forrest, that's a pretty cool move.
It's really interesting. It's a really interesting thing. And Shelby Foote said that the Civil War produced two geniuses, Abraham Lincoln and Nathan Bedford Forrest. Wow. And he meant in terms of his tactical prowess, his pure talent for warfare.
That's interesting. But also no real training in it, just enthusiasm. Yeah.
Enthusiasm.
Yeah. Interesting.
Don't underestimate how annoying Yankees can be. People really, back in the day, they really didn't like them, and vice versa. So I know that history sort of paints a picture where obviously it's good versus evil, and we have the sort of, K-12 understanding of it. But boy, these Southerners really didn't like those Yankees trying to tell them what to do. And it continues unto today.
It continues today.
And it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It cuts both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Old Colonel, I don't want to dwell on too much because we actually got to get to the actual subject, but I think some of this paints a picture of the world that Faulkner came from, right? The old Colonel eventually is murdered. Just a few years before William Faulkner is born, he's murdered by a business rival in the town square of Ripley, Ripley, Mississippi. So that's one thing going on. He's got this great grandfather named the Old Colonel. Now his grandfather was called the Young Colonel, and every generation down from the Old Colonel is like a slightly paler shade of the Old Colonel, right? The next guy down, he's kind of a smaller time business guy. He does like railroad stuff. He's buying raw land. He's buying little bits and pieces of businesses here and there. And he's a little bit of a wild man, but he's nothing like the Old Colonel, right? He didn't drum up a posse to go fight in a war or any of this. By the time you get to Faulkner's dad, Murray, it's an even paler shade. This is where, I should back up. The Young Colonel, who's Faulkner's grandfather, did exhibit one of the Faulkner traits, which was a strong penchant for alcohol. He was kind of he was a sort of a solo guy, a bit of an kind of a raging alcoholic, actually. And but he still had the entrepreneurial spirit of the old colonel. By the time we get to Murray, again, we're dealing with a guy who's a bit of an alcoholic, but generally considered kind of a dullard by people who knew him. Not necessarily bright, not necessarily interesting, no really joie de vivre. You know, he was sort of he was waiting for his father, Faulkner's grandfather, to give him a piece of the railroad. The grandfather basically believed that Murray was incapable of running a business of that magnitude. And so Murray just kind of bounced around, just kind of got the jobs that he could. We will get more, we'll definitely talk more about that, because his role, and especially the University of Ole Miss, plays a pretty important factor in Faulkner's life. Yeah. So I want to get into the books a little bit here, and I don't want to stop Aaron from jumping in.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have Aaron here. I also want to say that we're changing something on Art of Darkness now, where our After Dark episodes for the Patreon subscribers, it's patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We're going to save an especially dark story, an especially quirky anecdote story for the After Dark subscribers. So definitely go to Patreon if you want. If you like how we do this, if you want to hear a little extra zhuzh, do that, support the show. But yeah, maybe now's a good time to pause and sort of, Aaron, where are you at with Faulkner? How much of this did you know? Is this all in line with what you're aware of?
Oh, this is great. I haven't delved into Faulkner's life before he was born, and didn't know about the old colonel or the young colonel.
Okay.
But I was immediately vibing with how those two things become a presence in Absalom, Sound and the Fury with the Compson family. There's old Compson, or General Compson, who everyone refers to, and then the father is a paler shade, and then you get to Quentin. So that it's interesting to see how that comes
when
in.
I came across this, I was like, oh my gosh, Absalom's like Faulkner's life, basically.
Right.
Which had not dawned on me.
Absolutely.
So very, very interesting. I mean, I figured it was stories he'd kind of heard. I didn't realize it was in his lineage. One thing to note, this streak of sort of violence and craziness too. Murray, his father, Faulkner's father tried to kill the murderer of the old colonel, and ended up getting his fingers shot off. So there was some kind of scuffle in the town square about, you killed the old colonel, and, shots rang out, essentially. So there was a fair amount of violence and tension and drama and sort of operatic drama going on in the family tree, for sure. So talk kind of briefly about his childhood. He's the oldest. William Faulkner, again, he doesn't have the U in the name yet, which I find really interesting. It's just Faulkner. Known to be a pretty smart kid. His mother was very, and we see this in a lot of our subjects, his mother was very much like pushed books on him and very much cultivated the creative and imaginative side of him. As he was getting older, it was pretty clear he didn't really have the same interests as other boys. He wasn't really into sports. He was probably a bit of an introvert. He definitely was an introvert. But he also started, as he moved into high school, he didn't really care much for the rules. He basically failed out of English in high school and had to repeat at least the 11th grade, if not one other grade. So was not a star pupil by any means. In high school, he meets a woman who will be a big part of his ultimate story. He meets Estelle Oldham, who is from another... and one thing I should mention, by the time Faulkner's born, when old Colonel's alive, the Faulkner name is a big name. This is a prestige name, basically. But by the time William's born, it's clear that they've been taken down several notches, to the point that when he meets Estelle, the Faulkner name's sort of not good enough for the Oldhams. So just sort of an interesting note. When they met, though, they both felt like they were sort of fated to be married. But she gets proposed to by somebody else when she's quite young, and ends up marrying this guy and is sort of briefly out of William Faulkner's life, which was difficult for William to deal with, because he was in love with her and he felt like this was the woman that I'm going to marry, right?
Yeah.
So in this time he's writing, he's got poetry mostly early on. He's big into Henry Fielding, Joseph Conrad, Balzac. Is that how you say that? How do you say Balzac?
Yeah,
that's what I've always heard.
Yeah, all right.
It sounds rude, right? But I think that's it. That's it.
It does.
Yeah,
I thought so too. I was like, I don't know how else you would pronounce that.
I think that's it.
Yeah, and he was also very into Shakespeare and Swinburne. A lot of his early poetry, Faulkner's early poetry, is basically plagiarizing Swinburne, apparently.
Oh.
It's like almost it's one of those swap out a couple words here and there, right? So
Joyce did that too, by the way. He was really Swinburne was really important for writers.
Really?
For Borner. Yeah.
This makes me want to go. I don't think I've read a verse of Swinburne before. I might have to.
I've just read a little bit.
Yeah, I can't say I know him that well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the name vaguely rings a bell, but yeah. Faulkner meets a guy in Oxford named Philip Stone, who's a couple years older than him when when Faulkner's in high school still. And Philip Stone is like convinced that Faulkner has great literary talent, and this friendship ends up being fairly significant. So now here's the thing. So Faulkner graduates high school. He's kind of shiftless. He doesn't care about rules. He doesn't really care about having like a job. He worked in his grandfather's bank for a little while, but apparently all he really got from that was he drank. That's when he started to drink, was when he worked in his grandfather's bank, because his grandfather kept a bottle of booze in the desk drawer, basically.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So most of the time after high school, what he does is writes a little poetry, plays a lot of golf, drinks a bunch of whiskey, and then kind of has like a do-nothing job at his grandfather's bank. He's like borderline neat, not an employment education.
Yeah, all right.
He's like right at that. He's got, the only reason he's got a job is because his grandpa owns a bank, right? Yeah. So in 1918, he moves up with Phil Stone. His friend Phil Stone is up near Yale. He moves up there, and he's a filing clerk for the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. And this is when he starts spelling the name with the U, because as soon as Faulkner leaves home, he starts to kind of tell stories about who he is and where he's been and what he's done. He's a little bit of a fabricator, and it actually gets kind of hilarious in a little bit. Now 1918, he's 21. Kevin, what is a major historical event going on in 1918?
Hey, we know we're in the Great War.
Yeah,
the war to end all wars.
Yeah,
they thought.
Yeah,
right. And the flu, the terrible flu that was the Spanish flu that was going around.
That's right. Yeah. Some ways it feels like the war that began all wars a little bit, but so Faulkner can't get into the American military because he's too short. This is officially the story. I don't know if that's actually true. It sounds kind of made up to me, but apparently that's the deal. Apparently he was too short. So he's working. So when he's working up at Winchester, he hears that there might be a possibility that he can get into the English Royal Flying Corps. Right. So okay, I can't even repeat. Let me read like a little bit from this biography. This great biography, One Matchless Time: A Life of William Faulkner. Okay, it's a fantastic book. It's well referenced. So this is Faulkner. This is what he does to get into the English Royal Flying Corps, who is training folks up in Toronto at the time. In late May, Faulkner's brother Jack enlisted in the Marine Corps, stirring the sense of rivalry always latent between these two. One Canadian officer whom Faulkner and Stone met at a party suggested that they should attempt to join the newly organized Royal Air Force, which had begun recruiting pilots for one of 20 air squadrons being formed in Canada. Of course, American citizens were not eligible, but Faulkner saw no reason he and Stone could not pass themselves off as Englishmen. They began to practice speaking with an English accent under the tutelage of a British friend. Elaborate and amusing deceptions were perpetuated including the creation of a fake portfolio of letters from an invented English clergyman. Here he shows his writerliness, the Reverend Mr. Edward Twimberly Thorndike, who wrote that Stone and Faulkner were good, God-fearing young Christian gentlemen.
Why,
Now,
hello, Aaron Gwyn.
yes.
Hello. I'm doing the, well, yes.
Yeah. So, so Phil Stone kind of thought this was all just a joke, but like Faulkner went through with it. Faulkner went to the embassy. Faulkner got an appointment to go up to Toronto, went to Toronto, and carried a fake English accent the entire time, enrolling in the British military.
Oh, that's wild.
And, I mean, paperwork was a lot easier to fudge back then. You just kind of say, and also they needed bodies. So who's going to run a background check and make sure, is he really English?
Right. Yeah.
I am an Englishman, I'll tell you.
Right.
I really wonder how the accent sounded. How would you even know at the time what it even sounded like? It's not like you had.
Great point.
I mean, I suppose you would have maybe some radio at that point, but that's very curious.
Yeah, being from, I mean, they apparently they had a British friend or something, but down in Oxford, I doubt that he was running into anybody who spoke with an English accent.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, funny. I can't believe he like, it's kind of an amazing feat to like to develop the accent and then go there and then to like actually carry it out.
Yeah. It's very sort of theatrical and flamboyant and fun.
Super method, man. Right?
It is.
It's like completely method.
Right. And so, but here's the thing. He starts making stuff up in his letters to home. He writes home. He's like, well, there's two types, writing home to Miss Maud, his mom. He's like, well, there's two types of pilots you can become here. You can become a officer pilot or a something else pilot. And of course, he wrote that he was going to become an officer pilot, right? It was always, this is going to happen. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And, meanwhile, he's just doing the most basic basic training kind of stuff, which is, fine, but he wanted to fabricate, obviously. Now he was a little late to the game, and the Great War ended before his training did. So he never actually like went anywhere. He just kind of did part of his training in Toronto. Nevertheless, when he returned to Oxford, he returned wearing full British officer regalia because he wanted everybody to think he was a British officer.
All right.
And he walked with a limp that he maintained for months, if not years.
Okay. All right. It's a little eccentric.
Yes. And if he didn't already, like, if he didn't know you, apparently at this time, like, if he didn't know you, if you ran into him in New Orleans or something, right, in the years after, he would tell wild tales about his role in the Great War as a pilot. And everybody back home knew that he never went anywhere. He's just telling completely fabricated stories.
Well, so we have a natural storyteller, but not even just on the page.
Right. Yeah. Right. And
this is what happens to what happens to fiction writers when they're not working. It really does. It really does.
Oh my God. Well, don't even get me started on theater people who aren't in the theater.
Yeah.
When they start podcasts.
Yeah.
But tell me a little more. What is it like for authors of fiction who don't have the outlet, Aaron?
Oh my gosh. It's not even Brad can speak to this as well. It's not even not having the outlet. You can have the outlet, but just be done with something, done with a project. And you're like, oh, good grief.
Yeah.
I could tell you stories, but then I start thinking, well, has the statute of limitations on that expired? It's you really, if you can sell the thing on the page, you've been selling yourself other things and selling other people things.
Right.
And I think there's something about it, and every writer has their own experience with this, and you can tell me what you think. I want to hear what Brad thinks, but I think maybe there is a pleasure in just entertaining.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's common for young men to tell self-aggrandizing lies. That is like, okay, it's embarrassing, but a lot of us can look back and be like, oh my gosh, right? Yeah, okay. Sure. But there's an element with someone like Faulkner that it's self-aggrandizing, but he's also just interested in entertaining people.
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that. Is like, wouldn't this be, and there's something about returning home, like, well, what would make this all a cooler story is if I came home and I had a war injury and I was a British officer now. Like, what's a Mississippi boy doing being a British officer, right? There's you're introducing, some novelty and some interest. Now, it's also self-serving at the same time. You know, he didn't come back and say, well, I'm a criminal and I escaped from prison or something. But like,
there's a quality of parlor theatrics in this period too that I think is maybe a little lost to us now. Everybody could play piano. Everybody was eccentric, but I mean, things were a little more immediate then, right? Mm-hmm. People talk about this and how difficult it is now to reinvent ourselves in this country. How hitherto you would have someone like Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman, grow up in Mankato, Minnesota, or wherever it was, and sort of flunk out or abandon a year at the U here, steal some records from people. Today, now, where would he end up? He'd end up working at a Culver's somewhere. Or he'd have so much social media presence by the time he was 20 that, you know, he'd be fixed in an identity. Back then, and obviously this is a century before even, or half a century before, you just got on the road.
Right.
And you could just kind of
let's go to a town where nobody knows you.
Who was going to check?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's also something like, you know, in the writing of fiction that there's this old saw about, you know, writing fiction, it's lies that tell the greater truth in some way, right? Yeah. And not that Faulkner's telling the greater truth, but there might be something about like, this is the story that I want to be true, to value myself in my own eyes. Like, this is the thing that this is the narrative that makes sense for this heroic vision I have about myself in a way. Right. Yeah. So
and what the culture wanted too.
And what the culture wanted. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And his rivalry with his brother. And, you know, he was probably feeling pretty bad about that. He hadn't done well in high. I mean, this is the other thing. He's not Nobel Prize winning William Faulkner when he's doing this. He's a guy from Mississippi who's kind of shiftless, didn't really do anything in high school. His family used to be something, but it isn't anymore. He doesn't seem to have any particular talent other than his one friend thinks he's a good writer. Well, okay, you got one friend who thinks you're a great writer. I mean, that's cool, but like, you know, so, you know, he's taking this one moment and trying to turn it into more than it is, you know.
Underachieving loner,
right?
With underachieving loner genius,
right?
With exceptional world-class talent,
right?
No connections, no accomplishments, and no education.
Aaron, we're talking about Faulkner here.
Oh! Wait, hold on a second.
So it's funny, and it's in the newspaper. The one thing that's really funny because there's a few like clips from like his local newspaper from things that sort of happened, and he does when he gets back. They basically say he was a British officer, so it's actually in like the paper of record for Oxford that he returned from the war. You know, just kind of hilarious. He goes to Ole Miss after this. Now, I don't think he actually even graduated high school, but because he was quote unquote a veteran, he was able to go to Ole Miss as a special student.
Okay, amazing.
While there, he took on a really kind of unusual persona. He liked to dress really well, and this would kind of come and go throughout his life. But at this time, he liked to dress to the nines. But he was very pretentious and kind of smug to people. But he barely did any assignments. He barely showed up to class.
He really, really was a NEET of some order.
Dandy.
There's a bit of a foppishness here. Brad seems to have frozen. We'll see if he comes back. This is just fascinating. I don't know if he's writing at this point. I mean, it sounds like maybe he was writing some early poetry.
Mm-hmm. There's all of the stuff that ends up in the Marble Fawn collection. And a lot of these guys, quote, veterans, in his case, of the First World War, are writing these sketches that aren't quite fiction and aren't quite poetry. And you see that from Hemingway. This is the kind of stuff that Stein is mentoring people into writing.
Oh, right. Yeah. Gertrude Stein. Yeah.
Yeah.
These little vignettes and things.
Yeah. It's very much these pieces that are collected. I think they're called New Orleans sketches. I have a collection of them.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they were published in his lifetime even, but everything his hand touched is of course now published.
Yeah, I think Brad's doing a great job kind of bringing us into the world. This story of going to try to join the Royal Air Force in Canada, that I never would have anticipated that at all.
It's crazy. So crazy.
I'm pretty excited to hear about, what happens when he really begins to kick off the writing career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so in the meantime, while we wait for Brad, why don't you tell us where can people find you and your writing, Aaron? We're glad to have you. You're the first guest we're really having on to do one of these, and we wanted to bring you on because Faulkner's a passion of yours, and yeah.
Absolutely. No, I'm honored. The latest book is All God's Children. You can get it at whatever bookstore you go to. Order it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Powell's, however, Books A Million, however you get your books, Kindle or physical copy. So I did have a website, but I'm really bad at all of that stuff. So probably the best way to get to know me is through my writing.
Well, and we're pals, and I'm a little bit ashamed to say I haven't read the novel.
That's all right.
It's
not compulsory.
I want to. I mean, if you had to summarize the novel or pitch it to people who don't know what it's about, maybe now's a good time to do that.
Yeah. So All God's Children is the story of an escaped enslaved woman from Virginia and a man who comes to Texas in the 1820s to seek his fortune from Kentucky, who's an outsider in a different kind of way, and their lives are braided together. So it's Texas in the colonial, and then the Republic, the Revolution, and the Republic days, and then the war with Mexico. So the 1820s through the 1840s. And slavery in frontier Texas, and the chaos and struggle, and moments of freedom and moments of imprisoned cruelty. So like all the big stuff that America throws at you from the heartland.
Right. And in your background, you're from Oklahoma?
I'm originally from Oklahoma, from a little county, Seminole County. Grew up on a cattle ranch there.
A cattle ranch? I didn't know that. I think you might have maybe told me once last year, but tell me a little more about that.
Yeah. So we had show cattle and we had beef cattle, and we never made any money at it. But my grandfather's a cowboy from Texas, and his idea, he was a pipeliner, a welder, and so he would pipeline and get enough money and then put it into cattle, and then we would start to go broke, and then he would have to go out, sell some cattle, go back to pipelining until we could buy more cattle. And it's sort of Faulknerian now that I think about it itself. It's like, it's his idea of some sort of cowboy gentry that, if you have assets, you should put them in livestock somehow.
Yeah, right. A different age. What's that saying they have in Texas? All hat, no cattle.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a guy who...
We were all cattle, no hat.
Oh, no. Yeah, I feel you.
No hat.
Yeah, I feel you. No hat. That's so fascinating. And in your background, when did you know you were going to be a writer? Or was there a moment where you said...
So here's the bridge right here. I fell in love with literature in my late teens. I, like Faulkner, didn't do well in high school at all, didn't really pay attention. But I started off at a little junior college, and a professor from the Mississippi Delta, from Mississippi, who was a big Faulkner fan. I had him for the first class I ever took, and he read my first comp paper, and he said, "One day you're going to earn a fair living with a pen." And I was like, "Do what now?" And so beautiful. He's a great guy, tremendous man. Robert Hill Robert Radcliffe Hill. Shout out to Robert. He started me on the journey, and I became really interested in literature and just fell completely in love. Went to do a literature master's after I finished my undergraduate at OSU, Oklahoma State. And while I was studying for my master's comprehensives, I started reading Faulkner one summer. And I realized, good grief, man, I felt like I didn't know you could write about rural people in a Shakespearean way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
right.
I knew rural people. That had been my life up to that point. And I felt like I could do this. Not that I was a Faulkner or had his level of talent, but I felt like I could tell stories about rural folks in a way similar to Faulkner that didn't ridicule them, that didn't make fun of them, that didn't belittle them, that didn't talk down to them. I saw that their lives are tragic and brilliant and joyful and comedic and all these things. I guess because I came from them, I saw them as humans as opposed to, the butt of some joke, which I think is something that rural America is really fed up with. Always
Absolutely.
being the butt of a joke. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I completely relate to that, having grown up in North Dakota, although I've always sort of been driven toward, I guess, the cities personally. It would take a long time to sort of explain my relationship to it all. But the way that the South and rural and Midwestern America is treated in literature is wanting. And so, I think that's smart to sort of, be motivated toward that. Was your first foray into letters successful, or did you have some novels that ended up in the closet?
I didn't know what I was doing, right?
Yeah.
All I know is I started reading Faulkner that summer, and that summer I read As I Lay Dying, Sound and the Fury, Absalom, Light in August, and Go Down Moses, and I was just a swim in it. And I thought, like, okay, I don't know if I can do this, but I can't sit on the bleachers and watch. Like, I have to try to play, even if I'm ejected from the game.
Yeah.
Right. That was the feeling. And it was Faulkner who lit me up, because I saw, like, okay, here's the level this can be done at. Right. Like, you can take rural people, rural subjects, and create Shakespearean tragedy credibly out of their lives. And I hadn't seen that until I read Faulkner. Yeah. And literature, which I love, but it always seemed like, okay, literature is something that happens somewhere else. It's like growing up in the Midwest or in the South or the West. I mean, civilization and culture, that's what happens in New York. That's what happens in San Francisco. That's what's happening somewhere else, right?
Yep.
You never think, oh, wow, it's right here. So Faulkner showed that to me for the first time, and then introduced me to a body of literature, Flannery O'Connor and Robert Penn Warren, and, all of these Southern writers. I think Toni Morrison is very much in that vein. I mean, I think Morrison would say that sort of Faulkner, breathed life into her as well. And gave her a view into what could be done in American letters.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a nice interlude as we allowed Brad to reconnect here. Brad, Aaron was simply telling me about his background as a writer and what inspired him, and Faulkner being kind of central to that. Do you want to pick up where you left off?
Yeah, I caught just the end of that as I was getting myself sorted here, and that was beautiful. And I'm glad you made the Toni Morrison reference too, because I think she gets, not that she gets overlooked, because I she's a great writer and gets attention, and deservedly so. But I think people often don't include her in that. I mean, if you read Beloved feels like William Faulkner in a lot of ways, and not in a derivative way, but
I mean, yeah, there's a reason why when Oprah taught a summer of Faulkner in her book club, which I thought,
interesting.
Right. And they even, like, Vintage wisely sold a box set of, like, Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying, and Light in August. Nice. And I thought, people rip on Oprah, and Oprah's a billionaire, but, like, she's getting people to read real ass books.
Right.
Like, and true. Difficult books too. Yeah. Right. And so she came to talking about Faulkner because of her love of Morrison, and Morrison would constantly say, how huge Faulkner was for her and her own development as a writer.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of, and this is another interesting thing too, and why you can't necessarily just pin Faulkner down and we'll get to that. We're going to get to the biography, but this is good because I had not realized the extent of his influence until reading the biography. I realized I learned that Camus loved him. And Sartre and that whole set loved him.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. The South American set, like Borges loved him. The other South American writer who won the Nobel, I'm blanking on his name, Mario.
Marquez.
I don't know. Marquez probably did, I imagine. But, so he would, I hadn't realized how geographically that influence had spread and how much he'd meant to so many different people. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so this is a good this is why this guy is such a good subject. I mean, we're kind of telling all of the story of all of 20th century literature a little bit when you talk Faulkner.
That's right.
Yeah. So we were talking about Ole Miss. I'm not going to spend much more time there. One thing I did want to mention is his dad, through family connections, Faulkner's dad was appointed to the secretary of Ole Miss, a job he was completely unqualified for, which would end up helping out Faulkner in a couple of different ways. So Faulkner, in the third semester, Faulkner drops out. He just doesn't really care about college. He'd had a couple poems and things published in the school's paper, or maybe even the school's literary journal. And 1921, he decides he's going to go live in New York for a while. He had a friend who told him he could get him a job as a clerk in the Doubleday bookstore. Which was
so Faulkner went to New York?
Yeah. When he was, he would have been 24 or so.
Oh man, the lure of that city, that
gets
city gets everybody. I 7 years of my life, I don't want them back. But maybe I take a year and a half back.
It wasn't all great.
No, right.
Yeah, but he, so he goes. New York was never good for him. And he took this job, and he wasn't there very long. He got fired. Eventually, his report on why he got fired was like some confusion over the change, or something like that. Was why he got fired. Most likely, my guess, based on reading the description, he was borrowing books from the bookstore, and I've got a feeling that he forgot to bring one back.
Yeah, that sounds more like
saying something like that.
That sounds more like.
Oh, was he picking books?
He was definitely quote unquote borrowing books from the bookstore.
Was talking about Bob Dylan and the Dylan story.
Yeah.
And so, similar, not to derail, but Bob very famously stole a big crate of records from some guy. It's really funny. The guy was angry at the time, but then in hindsight, he's like, Bob needed those records more than I did.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. I mean, Faulkner's famous for the quote, "Ode to a Grecian urn is worth any number of dead old ladies," right? Like, his attitude is like, well, this book's here and I need to read it, so I'm going to read it.
The world is a library if you look at it from the right angle.
That's right.
Yeah. There's a saying too: you never borrow a book. You assume if you've lent the book out, you never lend a book. I assume it's gone as soon as I hand the book to somebody else. I assume it's never coming back. Yeah,
that's my attitude about it for sure. Yeah. If I want my copy, I'll just buy that person a copy of it.
right.
Or whatever. Yeah. So he ends up coming back to Oxford. He always comes back to Oxford. No matter no matter what, he always comes back to Oxford. His father gets him a job as the postmaster of Ole Miss. And
amazing.
He, according to his friend Phil Stone, this friend of his who was an early supporter, he made, quote, "the damnedest postmaster the world has ever seen." Now, this was not an accolade. Faulkner barely even did the job. So there were complaint after complaint after complaint about mail not getting delivered, mail getting delivered to the wrong place, getting delivered super late. There were stories about Easter hams rotting in the post office because he didn't deliver them. He had a little office in the back of the building, so he would close himself off in there. He would read all the students' magazines that came in via subscription, the Saturday Evening Post and the Atlantic Monthly and all of that. He was just taking advantage left and right and barely doing any work whatsoever.
They say, just to interrupt real quick, that when
for
he
sure,
was
man.
Postmaster, no piece of mail went unread that came through. So apparently he was going through correspondence. And, it's such a Faulknerian thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, what a good, if he's literally reading people's letters, I mean, okay, you shouldn't do that probably. However, if you were going to write one of the greatest bodies of literature of all time about a specific location, what better resource to have than everybody's letters?
I mean, maybe we should let the NSA off the hook, right? Maybe they're
fans of literature, right? They're
fans of literature.
The NSA is just trying to write the great American novel.
Yeah, 40 years from now, we'll have an AoD episode on somebody who is right now an NSA agent who is just
it's going to read like Philip K. Dick had a child with. I'm trying to think of who else. I mean, Borges and just this completely insane novel. Thomas Pynchon. Right.
So
who this reminds me of, if I may, Brad, I'm going to interject here. Carnegie, I believe it was Carnegie, was a telegraph operator. Oh, wow. So he was at the nexus of a lot of communication for years, if I'm not mistaken, which all went through his brain. And of course, later he would put all the pieces together and become fabulously, wealthy. I didn't understand when I was a younger person what the big deal was with, for example, like the internet. Like I knew it was something, but I really did not understand that information is the new oil. And I think we all know that now, right? Information is power. So clearly Faulkner was tapping into things here.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. That's also true of Vanderbilt. When he was a kid and he was ferrying people, he had his own schooner and he was ferrying people from one side of the river to the other. And he was, again, at a nexus of transportation communication. I mean, we're talking about internet, trains, and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah. And it's especially when that information, Yeah, especially when that information is so hard to get your hands on. It's not everybody's got it like now, right? You're a special case in a way. Yeah, right. That's pretty interesting. One other thing he was doing around this time as a postmaster, he was either basically reading/writing in the back of the post office, or he was drinking, playing golf, and he liked to tear around the countryside in his Model T, which he had painted yellow and modified for speed. So
amazing.
So it's just great stuff. I want to read the letter he was written by his boss when he got fired real quick.
It's not great.
It's not long, but it's pretty great. So he was there for about 3 years. And this is from Mark Webster, the guy who was his boss, and wrote the official charges. Here's the letter. Let's see. The official charges are neglects official duties, indifferent to interests of patrons, mistreatment of the mail. You are neglectful of your duties, and that you are a habitual reader of books and magazines and seem reluctant to cease reading long enough to wait on the patrons. That you have a book being printed at the present time, the greater part of which was written while on duty at the post office. That some of the patrons will not trust you to forward their mail because of your past carelessness, and these patrons have their neighbors forward same for them while away on their vacations. The letter included names of specific patrons, blah, blah, blah. You will please advise me in writing within 5 days from this date, stating whether the charges are true in part or wholly so, and show cause, if any, why you should not be removed.
Hey, they gave him a second chance, huh?
They did give him a second chance.
Hey, can you write your way out of this one, buddy?
Right.
That's the most chivalrous dismissal letter I've ever heard in my life. How chivalrous is that?
Yeah.
I mean, he almost called him sir. Sir, if you can get me cause, why you should not be held in contempt of being ungentlemanly.
Well, he is a veteran. So
that's true.
That's
Yeah,
true. Treat him with some
for a war
decorum.
hero. I mean,
Yeah. So here's what Faulkner said about when he left. He said in a letter, I reckon I'll be at the beck and call of folks with money all my life, but thank God I won't ever again have to be at the beck and call of every son of a bitch who's got 2 cents to buy a stamp.
Amazing. That's it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I think we have a show title there. He said, so I think we call this Faulkner's 2 cents.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. So he's so I think it's around 1925 when he gets out of the post office. So, he's not a spry young chicken anymore. He's getting to be in his late 20s. By the time he gets fired from the post office, his brother basically calls him a disgrace to the family. Because, he's gotten fired from the only thing resembling an actual job he's ever had. And he got fired not for, a mistake here or there, but like from a working man standpoint, like pure degeneracy, right? Just like not doing the job at all.
Well, and I think too, it's worth remembering at the time. What I can't recall the line, but there's something about his reading.
Yeah,
it didn't have the same quality that it has now. Reading, you could read for pleasure back then, and that would be considered certainly not masculine per se, and also pretty degenerate. It'd be like if somebody was on their phone all day now at work. It's not like back then everybody would go, oh, he's bettering himself through literature or through reading. It's like, no, he's not serving the customers, and he's being a lout. Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. So after the post office, he starts spending a lot of time in New Orleans. And this is where he starts to get some stuff published. He's getting like newspaper assignments, like journalism, and then some kind of short sketches of interest. And he's making something like, I think I did the math, he was making $25 a week or so on these little assignments. And which is, translates to about $400 today. So, he's not making much of anything, but he's living with friends and that sort of thing. And in general, partying a lot. So, but the one thing that did start to happen in this time is he was able to make some money writing, which is encouraging. And then not long later, he met Sherwood Anderson, who, I'm sure that name rings a bell to folks. Sherwood Anderson in 1920s was a big deal. It was an important guy to know, and he was known for being very kind of cultivating relationships with young writers and helping them along. He had a relationship with Hemingway as well, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Yeah. So
this is in New Orleans.
This is in New Orleans, correct?
And circle, what year are we? I'm trying to anchor myself.
This is like 1925 and a little after.
I just can't even imagine being in New Orleans in 1925.
Right?
What that must have been like. Right. Unreal.
Yeah, I mean, apparently they had a pretty good time. I mean, he started to know a lot of the other young kind of intellectual folks and people not the intellectual in the fancy sense, but smart young people who are doing cool stuff kind of sense, I guess.
My favorite people.
Yeah.
You know what the interesting thing is? Like around this time is when Hemingway, Eliot, Pound, Joyce, good grief, Murderers Row, Fitzgerald are in Paris. Yes. But Faulkner is as good or better than any of those folks. But it is inconceivable to think of Faulkner doing the Paris thing with those other writers, right? He is the misfit's misfit in some way. Like he would never go to Paris and pal around with the crew, right?
Yeah, you're right. That on the list of things that I knew about him, I think I could have said, I know he wasn't part of that circle. I just didn't think about it. You're right. And it shows in the writing. His writing is so distinct. Yeah, really that's a great point, Aaron.
Yeah. Now he did make his way to Paris sometime in the late 1920s, but it was all over by then. Hemingway had gone home and Fitzgerald had gone home, and he did manage to he sort of saw Joyce in a cafe but was too afraid to go talk to him. So that's as close to that scene as he got, was seeing
Did
Joyce from
anyone
across
ever
the room.
really see Joyce, Brad?
Well, he certainly never saw anyone.
This is very writerly. That moment was
Mhm.
Oh God, yeah. All right. Well, that's fun. 3 writers talk about writers on a podcast. Writers,
man.
writers.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on, Brad.
So he did go to Europe, and while he was in Europe, he basically, his first novel, Soldier's Pay, he had sent off to a publisher and then left for Europe. He'd managed to save some money. He got some money from the young colonel and money he'd saved from writing stories and whatnot. And he managed to be able to book a trip to Europe. He got word while he was in Europe that Soldier's Pay would be published. So that was his first novel. He got the modern equivalent of $3,000 for it. So not a ton of money, but hey, it's a publication, and that's super encouraging. It got some decent reviews in the New York Times, so it wasn't completely overlooked. Though it didn't bring him a ton of money or fame or anything like that. I don't know if have you read that one, Aaron?
I haven't read it. I haven't read his first 2, which Soldier's Pay and Mosquitoes. I haven't read. Those are the ones I've been warned away from, but I really ought to read them. Actually,
it would be interesting just to see the development. I mean, these aren't before. He's not working in the county stories yet. Soldier's Pay is a World War I story. I imagine he, pretended like he'd fought and used that experience a little bit.
Now, this is kind of a little bit of inside baseball, but did Liverite do those? Did Bonnie Liverite publish the first 2?
That's who published.
Right.
Both of those. Yeah,
very interesting.
Yeah, and Soldier's Pay, they were it was a very kind of shrugging sort of thing. I mean, $3,000. It's not, it's not a ton of. And that's modern. That's not back then. I think it was like $200 back then. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was, it was not much money whatsoever. And Mosquitoes came out like the next year, and again was reasonably well reviewed, but just didn't sell. And while he's got 2 books, I don't know if you even want to call it on the stands, while he's got 2 books out there, he's back in Oxford selling refreshments at a golf course, painting houses, painting signs for local businesses. He's doing kind of like, he's just like a weird dude in the neighborhood who also happens to be, in a respectable fashion, publishing these novels.
The thing is, that would never have flown in the little community I grew up in, but in the deep South, Oxford, Mississippi, they do make a space for their eccentrics. Right. So you can be the guy who works at the golf course and might be a veteran, but also, don't you publish novels? And
right.
I mean, they kind of like that. They're like, oh, these, it's kind of like England, right? They're quite fond of their eccentrics, and they kind of like that flavor.
Right. Yeah.
Oh boy, I like places like that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So he's now 1929. This is, Mosquitoes has come out. Soldier's Pay has come out. Sartori's has come out as well. None of them, again, fairly decently reviewed, but not really getting any attention. And then 1929 comes around, which I think is like this key year for Faulkner. One, Sound and the Fury comes out, which I don't know. It doesn't get any better than Sound and the Fury. It just gets different, in my opinion. It's just a powerhouse novel. And I thought he was older when he'd written that. I mean, he's 32 when Sound and the Fury comes out. This is pretty, by our standards, he's a pretty young man, really.
He's very young.
Yeah. He also, Estelle, his high school sweetheart, she's gotten divorced, or she gets divorced in 1929. She'd been married to this guy, didn't go particularly well. He'd been able to like finance her to live in Hawaii and do some things, but it just didn't work. And so she's back around. Faulkner feels like he's fated to marry her. She feels like she's fated to marry him. And so after like a short courtship to kind of get to know each other once again, though they'd had some communication in the meantime, they get married. And this is the thing. So let me tell you, let me read a little bit from this biography, because I want you to get a sense of what this marriage was like right from the jump. Okay, this is Faulkner in a letter, I believe, to his publisher. This is from the One Matchless Time biography. Quote, "I am going to be married, both want to and have to." And this is in all caps. "This part is confidential, utterly." Okay, ends caps. "For my honor and the sanity, I believe life of a woman. This is not bunk. Neither am I being sucked in. We grew up together, and I don't think she could fool me in this way. That is, make me believe that her mental condition, her nerves are this far gone. And no question of pregnancy. That would hardly move me. No one can face his own bastard with more equanimity than I. Neither is it a matter of promise or of a promise on my promises. It's a situation which I engendered and permitted to ripen, which has become unbearable, and I am tired of running from the devilment I bring about. This sounds a little insane. ...
It's really crazy. Wow.
Yeah. So, okay. So they get married, whatever. Both sides of the family are like, "Are you sure?" Like her dad is basically, her dad's like, "You're really going to marry this dude?" And his family's like, "So you're going to marry this woman who's gotten a divorce and has 2 kids and you basically are unemployed?" Like, you know what I mean? Hey, nobody's a fan of this.
It's not clear to me, Brad, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What denomination are they? What they must be a Christian family. Yeah,
I think he got married in a Methodist church, I believe.
All right.
They were not Baptists.
All right.
I think later in life he went to an Episcopalian church.
Okay,
I believe.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if Aaron, if you have any more insight into that. I
don't know much about his church going days. Methodist sounds right. It's hard for me to picture Faulkner inside of a church, though I think of him as philosophically a Christian writer.
I think he was. I think, maybe when it comes down to it, the metaphysical part of it, he kind of breaks down. But I think the values and all of that, for
100%.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Kevin, I'm going to ask you a question. So they go on a honeymoon, right? Estelle and William. What is the most foreboding thing that can happen on a honeymoon?
Yeah, you sleep with her sister.
Yeah, okay, that would be pretty bad. Yeah, that would be pretty bad.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of the most foreboding thing that could happen on a honeymoon.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now,
well, it's like, I guess if somebody went missing, or if it ended poorly and somebody went home in a fit. I guess I don't know. I don't know, Brad. I've only done it once and it went swimmingly. Yeah.
These are that's good to hear, and these are all great answers. Estelle, on their honeymoon, and it's kind of calling the honeymoons maybe a bit of a stretch. They basically went to Louisiana and stayed for a while. Estelle, one night during this trip, tries to commit suicide.
Oof. Oh,
yeah.
That. Right. Of course, I've got to remember. Yeah, what is an Art of Darkness episode without either a suicide or someone thinking of suicide? Or this is the podcast about the dark side of arts, and of course, I'm staring at this copy of the Virginia Woolf book right now. I should have guessed, Brad. It's always suicide. Yeah. Fun.
So
wait,
one night
on the honeymoon?
On the honeymoon.
That's not good. That's not good.
Yeah. So she apparently one night, and she was a very heavy drinker, like Faulkner was throughout her life. And one night, she walked out into the sea. They were staying at a place like. My take is it's sort of like on the beach, and she walked out into the sea. And she walked towards, as a moonlit night. I'm sorry. She walked out in a green robe, and she walked out to a place where she knew there was a drop off. Faulkner somehow got attention of this and looked out the window and saw her and started screaming and yelling. Their neighbor ran down and dragged her back onto the beach. So minutes later, she would have been gone. So.
I will never understand the desire to wade into water as a form of suicide.
Something very romantic about it.
What a really terrible way to die.
Right. No, I agree.
Yeah, I think so too. It's terrifying.
Oof.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. I don't like it.
So so that's a indicator of, you know, where she was, at least in this marriage, and that letter, I think, is an indication of where he was, and yet they remained married, you know, throughout, you know, to the end, basically. Marriage is over. Sound of the Fury is kind of in development. He's had a couple of books out, but he needs a stable job. So what does he do? He gets a job as a night watchman at a power plant.
Now we're talking.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the thing. He always managed to luck himself or strategize himself into a job where he could read and write as much as possible. Because as a night watchman at a rural power plant, there's really not a lot of work to do. And so, you know, he's working 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And he's also writing As I Lay Dying.
On the back of a wheelbarrow, he told people.
Yes, yeah.
This is he's already written Sound and the Fury. Oh yeah. My God! And he's working at what did you say? It was a power plant.
A power plant as a night watchman. Yeah.
And let me jump in. Sound and the Fury is an absolute masterpiece. It's one of the finest novels ever conceived. Mm-hmm. I mean, Gwyn, would you agree? I mean, it's
great. It's great. Yeah. It's not my favorite Faulkner, but it's undoubtedly a masterpiece.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say either Sound of the Fury or As I Lay Dying would probably be the best for someone who's never read any Faulkner to read. I would
definitely,
they're fairly accessible.
I've taught As I Lay Dying in intro to literature classes, and the students really respond to it. It's 16 narrators, all first person, very short chapters. And it's a real banger. It's absolutely his shortest, most accessible, and just like, this is who this guy is.
Right.
Like it nails it down. This is what I'm all about. And he said, you know, I wanted to write a novel by which my reputation could stand or fall.
Oof. Yeah, that's what's interesting is he has this deep ambition, right? Like he was trying to, from a literary standpoint, knock it out of the park, right?
Absolutely.
And he did in that one. And that is a cool book. I mean, it's 16, like you said, 16 different perspectives. If I remember right. So what is the basic premise of that book, Aaron?
Okay, so you have a family called the Bundren family. And the mother, Addie, is, when the novel starts, dying, and she will die in that novel, and we kind of know this is what's going to happen. And once she dies, this family, who are rural, have a body on their hands, and she wishes to be buried in town, which is Jefferson, that's modeled on Oxford. So she dies, and her sons and daughter and husband, aunts, take her into town to be buried. They start off in a wagon and end up doing other things. And they encounter what Faulkner calls the twin trials of fire and flood. So he thought these were the worst things that could befall a human being, that while moving, you're visited with fire and visited with flood. And he said the only thing that's worse than that is war, and war is only worse because it involves all the other three.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And now, well, let's back up a second, because we want to lean on your expertise as much. Tell us what Sound and the Fury. Give us a take on what is Sound and the Fury. What's going on.
Sound and the Fury is Faulkner's first. I mean, we'll move past Sartorus and Flags in the Dust, which we'll call that's Faulkner's first attempt to write about these people that he knows, the rural people he knows.
When you know what's coming later, those feel like warm-ups a little bit.
They're absolute warm-ups, right? But Sound of the Fury's the first time that he confidently talks about, I'm going to write about this postage stamp of Earth that I know. This, for him, the Yoknapatawpha country or the Yoknapatawpha county. And so The Sound of the Fury is a family novel. There are 4 narrators as opposed to 16. The first is Quentin Thompson, who is the the son of this dilapidated family, much like the Faulkner family, who once was great. The Thompsons were once, prosperous, and it's just entropy has taken hold of this family and ground it down. And so as a last-ditch effort, the Thompsons sell a huge part of their land, which then becomes a golf course, to send Quentin to Harvard so that Quentin can be a gentleman. And they believe that somehow this is like a last-ditch attempt. This is a Hail Mary pass to drag their name out of the dust. And, Quentin's a bright young man, and Quentin is the horse to bet on. We're going to send him to Harvard. He's going to be a gentleman, and we're going to recover this family. Well, Quentin kills himself. In the novel Sound and the Fury, the other two narrators, Quentin's sister, around which the whole thing, Quentin's brother Benji, who is, I'm not sure what term we would use today to describe his condition, but he is impaired intellectually, and he also experiences time in a very unique way. So the past, the present, and the future are all one for Benjamin. And so he can't distinguish between those moments. So in his section, he's narrating everything. He's narrating the past, mixing it with the present, mixing it with things, foreshadowing things that are to come. The other narrator is the brother Jason, who is this brutal cynic. And his section starts, and they're referring to the sister Caddy, around who this whole narrative swirls. And Jason says, "Once a bitch, always a bitch, I say." That's his first line in his section, right? Then the final chapter is this. The other three have been first person narrators. The final chapter is referred to as the Dilsey section. And Dilsey is the African-American, not an enslaved woman, but, this is in the early 1900s, where the condition of African-Americans living in rural Mississippi is not by any means great, not by any means complete freedom, but she is the servant of this family, and she is given this beautiful third-person voice, and she is the kind of grace that salves this so far nihilistic narrative that we've read. So that is the Sound of the Fury. Sound of the Fury is a real modernist work that announces itself as being, this is a work of high modernism. Not everyone's going to get this. I'm going to, put it down, and if you get it, you get it.
You can see, I hadn't thought about this until you started describing the Benji scenes, and now I'm remembering that better. You can kind of see how he would have influenced somebody who seems so far afield as Borges, right? With this relationship and how he's depicting time moving and all of those sorts of things. You can see how somebody who's writing something that's very much not a Southern novel, who's doing something much more speculative, could start adopting some of these techniques, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So so he writes those two books. He writes Sound and the Fury and As I Lay Dying back to back, in both of them in very short order, because throughout his life, Faulkner, for all of his degeneracy and drinking, and he had, when he was working, apparently had like superhuman focus, it seems. That's the only way to interpret the ways that he put some of these books together in the time frames and the conditions. It's startling.
That seems to be the case, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he apparently wrote As I Lay Dying. Now, he said 6 weeks. Now, it was probably a little longer than that, but not much.
Yeah. There was another, and I might come to it, there's another book he wrote later in 47 days.
Insane. So insane.
Yeah, so just like biologically, that we've got a freak on our hands in some way, right?
He is a freak. He very much is. And there's there's very little revision. I mean, you can look at the different versions of As I Lay Dying, and there are some edits and there are some changes, but he had those 16 people down, man. He had them down, all those different voices, idiosyncrasies, their character traits. Like, good grief, man.
Yeah.
Aaron, do we know much about his writing habits in terms of his drinking? Or is this somebody who had the bottle with him? Or
different people will tell you different things, but what I've come to believe is that he drank and drank and drank, and then he started a novel and sort of either really cut back on the drinking or stopped almost entirely. Right? And so he drank and drank and drank, stopped, wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and then drank and drank and drank and drank and drank. And so he was a binge drinker, and he was writing or drinking.
Yeah.
Do we know what
his
his
impression I got? Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, do we know what his drink of choice was?
Oh, whiskey.
I was going to say had to be whiskey. Right?
After the bootlegging era, Jack Daniels. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So
it's one of those cases of do we wish that Faulkner had not been an alcoholic?
Right. I don't know.
Very interesting.
His family probably wishes, but one thing just for a historical context here, just a greater historical context. So Sound and the Fury comes out October 1929, and October 1929 there was also a major historical event, which was the stock market crashing. As I Lay Dying, he starts writing the day after the stock market crashes. So just to give us a sense of where we're at in the world, and imagine trying to sell Sound and the Fury. Not only are you not particularly well known, not only is the book pretty strange in terms of marketability, but you're also dealing with, the greatest, the biggest financial crisis of your young country's history. So
I have two things to say here real quick, Brad. Are we going to get to the scandal around this at some point? Because I know that I think it might have been banned, and maybe I'm getting ahead of things.
Oh, I didn't come across it being banned, actually. Though it might have been. It wouldn't surprise me. Now, Sanctuary, which was a book he was working on sort of around this time, wouldn't come out for several years because the publishers all basically thought there was no way they could get away with publishing it. So I think Sanctuary came out in 31 or 32, but it had been sitting in a desk drawer at his publishers for 3 or 4 years at that time.
Well, the other thing I wanted to say was an old timer in New York City who traded the market. His father was also a trader, and his father would said to him once when there was a very red day on the market, he told him, "You're going to want to walk in the middle of the street today."
Wow! Wow!
Yeah, I never forgot that.
Yeah. So Sound and the Fury comes out, and just like the previous books, it's mostly well reviewed. I mean, anything like that's going that much out on a limb, it's going to have its detractors for sure. But his literary cachet is starting to grow, obviously. Now, 1931, Estelle gives birth to a daughter named Alabama, who's named after Faulkner's aunt.
Roll Tide.
Yeah, Roll Tide. And Alabama was 2 months premature, and she would die after a week or two. She may have never even come home from the hospital. This might be.
No, I feel bad about saying Roll Tide.
That's all right.
Oh man, I don't want to derail you, but I did in the background here find out that these books have been censored periodically over time.
Okay.
As I Lay Dying was banned by a number of school districts. For
that doesn't surprise me.
Obscenity, using God's name in vain, talking about
interesting.
Abortion. Yeah. So I don't know if this was.
He didn't pull punches.
Right.
He didn't gloss over stuff and use, he might have used euphemisms and things, but he didn't. Sanctuary. Sanctuary is probably his. I don't know if it's quite his darkest, but it's certainly his most ripe for scandal, and it's
up there.
Dark.
It's up there, man.
Yeah. So tell us about Sanctuary, Aaron.
So Sanctuary is Faulkner's attempt to go hard-boiled in the tradition of a Dashiell Hammett and other writers who Faulkner saw as making some cash. And so Faulkner, I forget the word that he used, but something to the effect of he came up with the most grotesque premise that he possibly could, and that was a young Mississippi debutante who's a University of Oxford student is kidnapped by a psychopathic pimp and taken to a Memphis brothel. And then I don't even know the terminology for this, right? So that man's name is Popeye, and Popeye will periodically come into the room where she's strapped to the bed, and in an attempt to make a prostitute of her, will rape her with a corn cob and then stand at the foot of the bed whinnying like a horse, right? And so the only person looking for the debutante, his name is Temple Drake, is a righteous reporter. Imagine something like that. This could only exist in literature. A righteous reporter who is trying to solve the case that the authorities have given up.
Wow, I didn't know that one. I don't know that one.
That's a crazy book.
That is crazy. Yeah, fascinating.
It's a crazy book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
And this was, though the publishers were reluctant to put it out, and though it did cause a little bit of a scandal, it made, I think it was his first, I think he made more money at that time. He made more money off of Sanctuary than anything before it. And it was definitely something that spread into Europe. Like, this is where folks in France started to pay attention to him, was with Sanctuary. Now, and then, subsequently would go back and look at his previous work. But this was the thing that sort of, made people raise their eyebrows internationally with Sanctuary.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So, and I guess to do that, you got to do something wild, right? And then maybe people start paying attention a little bit.
I wonder if this.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Do you think that this is the first? I can't think of another. Maybe there's a glaring one that I'm not thinking of. Is this the first abducted girl in American literature? I mean, this becomes a huge trope. The girl has gone missing. I mean, how many of these books have become bestsellers over the last 20 years?
Yeah,
I wonder if this is
a good point. Now I know
and Lolita too is that. That's what Lolita is. Yeah, interesting.
Which came, a couple decades later. The only thing I can think of, and I can't even think of the specific book, but there was a bit of a trope of that in Westerns with tribes taking girls, right?
Yeah. That's the Searchers, right?
Yeah, the Searchers, the Great
Searchers.
Western.
Yep.
For sure. Yeah.
So that is definitely a trope, and he's playing it. In his style as excellently as anybody. So at this point, like 1931, 32, he starts getting some attention as a writer more than he was before. I mean, to me, a decent review in the New York Times sounds like a home run, but he's starting to get, actual attention, and he, and getting, reasonably well known in literary circles. He goes up to this conference in Virginia, this conference on Southern writers. And he basically at the reception just publicly vomits because he's been drinking so hard all day. And this is the thing you kind of learn about Faulkner as you go through. Faulkner, he drank when there was good news. He drank when there was bad news. He drank when he was stressed out. He drank when he was anxious because he had a touch of social anxiety, I think. And he drank when he was stressed, and he drank when he was bored. So you've got, it was the go-to for everything, basically. And his volumes were apparently pretty astounding to most people, what he could throw back in a day. So there's this a trope in Faulkner's life, going to some event where he's, if not the guest of honor, he's definitely somebody that people at this event, and whether it's New York or wherever, they're paying attention to him. and he is smashed to the gills.
Either that's always a good look.
After or during, right?
Yeah,
right.
That's great. Yeah, having been that guy a few times, you don't want to be that guy.
No. You don't want to be that guy.
No, don't be that guy.
No.
It's fun. It's fun in your early 20s, but it starts to get really sad as you careen into your 30s.
Well, Dennis Rodman probably produced the most egregious form of this. If you've seen the documentary Big Bang in Pyongyang, where Dennis Rodman gets drunk at a state dinner in North Korea, grabs the mic away from a North Korean woman singing their traditional song, and goes into a rendition of Sublime Santeria.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and then of course, you need to drink more later to forget having done this.
Yeah.
Although I don't know how much shame, he had. Wow. Yeah. Whoa, doggy. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sunday morning coming down. from Pyongyang.
Yeah.
From Pyongyang.
Jeez.
All right, Brad, go on.
Yeah, no, it's all right. That's so he's in, so Faulkner's in the great tradition of embarrassing yourself at important dinners for sure. Right. He around this time, 1932-ish, he buys Roanoke, which was sort of a somewhat rundown farmhouse outside of Oxford. He would quit the not the post office. He would quit the power plant and sort of take a summer to try and restore it. And this place would be somewhere that he would live at least part of the year for the rest of his life. And it ended up being in some ways, it's probably a little bit of a albatross around his neck financially, because as soon as he gets Roanoke, some other bills start compiling, and Faulkner's pretty much worried about money for close to the rest of his life. Sort of never ends. There was an interesting thing here too. We talk about, this is place, a part of the world where 100 years before this, there was slavery going on. Faulkner has servants, African American servants, who are not paid, though he takes care of their food, lodging, and medical bills. And I just read that and I was like, well, wait a second.
So they're like grad students.
It was also strange. Like, he was really good friends, like close friends.
Yeah.
This is only strange because of the culture of that place at that time, obviously, but very close friends with a number of African-American men. And, dedicates several of his novels to the African-American women the African-American woman who raised him, was like his nanny.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't know that this is him having these servants. You wonder what his thoughts were about it. I mean, he probably was friendly, treated them, quote unquote, decently in terms of just interpersonally.
Mm-hmm.
And he's taking care of their food, lodging, and medical bills, and in his head, you kind of wonder what the gymnastics are. Is he justify not paying them because, we take care of everything that they need? What else?
Right.
I don't know. It's just
very interesting.
I read that and I thought, man, you didn't pay them anything.
Yeah. I didn't know that part. Yeah. That's really wild, man.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. So 1932, again, he bought Roanoke, bills are mounting, and this is when we get Faulkner in Hollywood. And it's so interesting to think about Faulkner in Hollywood for a great sense of I think what the vibe of that might have been like. I don't know if either of you guys have seen the great film Barton Fink.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah.
Coen Brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
he's a playwright.
Yeah. And the W.P. Mayhew is a sort of a caricature of Faulkner.
Absolutely.
In that film, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you've got this sort of Southern aristocratic gentleman, at least in mannerism, who's just a total lush, but also a literary genius, also kind of prostituting himself to Hollywood. It's a really interesting conundrum. But this is the thing. He made boatloads of money when he was there. His first contract was for $450 a week at the time. if you do the math, that is roughly $9,000 a week right now.
Unreal, man. I mean, TV writers start at $5,000 a week right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
It is
That's amazing.
Great way to make money if you can do it. Of course, you in most cases have to sell a little part of your soul to do it.
Sure, and he did. Yeah,
but my DMs are open.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so that's some pretty good. I mean, I don't know anybody who would who would turn down $9,000 a week. That's pretty good scratch.
Good money.
And also it was something he could do. He didn't have to do, full time forever. He could work. He would work for a while. He would have short-term contracts and that sort of thing. Mostly he's sort of contributing bits of dialogue and scene ideas. He's not like the main screen that you would have like a writer's block where you'd have a bunch of people all working on stuff. So
he wrote the Howard Hawks film based on the Hemingway novel To Have and Have Not, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, that was the first thing he worked on that was like actually that he contributed a significant, it might have been his first screen credit actually. And it was successful. I mean, that was Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and that was a hit. But you have to imagine there had to have been a little bit of bitterness working on a Hemingway.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine?
Can
you imagine?
Right.
I really did not know this side of Faulkner's history. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time in Hollywood. Actually,
I did not know that.
Yeah. And he would become, he was a bit of a character out there because he dressed the way that he dressed. He dressed in like Southern gentleman kind of outfits and tweeds and things like that. He walked around with a cane, and nobody really looked like him. Early on, even though he wasn't successful screenwriting at all, it seemed like producers and things liked to have him around because his presence, Faulkner works for us, lent the whole enterprise a little bit of prestige, right? If you got Faulkner in the back office working on your screenplay, you're doing something serious,
credibility. Yeah,
right.
That's still to this day what people trade on. A lot of playwrights will have the one play, it'll get the New York Times review, maybe it'll be nominated or a finalist for the Pulitzer, and then the phone rings and they don't write another play for 5 years because they're off in Hollywood working for HBO or Netflix, and just sort of the way of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Faulkner, so over time, he became a little bit of I don't even want to say a socialite necessarily, but people knew who he was, and he would go out to dinner and he was drinking a lot, oftentimes, especially later as he got a little bit more established, he would start drinking at work first thing in the morning. He would be sipping from his flask and just, he would say, I got to lubricate my tonsils, before I get to work.
It's a trap, gentlemen. It's a trap.
That's right. It is. There's a great anecdote. So one evening, Howard Hawks, I'm reading from the biography again. One evening, Howard Hawks introduced Faulkner to Clark Gable, who asked the young man which writers he should be reading. Faulkner replied, Hemingway, Cather, Mann, Dos Passos, and William Faulkner. Surprised by the last name on the list, Gable asked, "Oh, do you write?" Faulkner replied, "Yes, Mr. Gable. What do you do?"
Oh, snap!
Just a smug, smug jerk. Apparently, Clark Gable and Faulkner would become friends. They would even go hunting together and stuff like that.
Wow. So I like that.
Yeah, Clark Gable probably thought it was funny, But yeah,
probably why they became friends. And in my mythology, right, it would be
Clark Gable's like, oh, this is this guy who, a guy like Clark Gable, he probably had a lot of yes men around,
Mm-hmm. There is a fantastic moment in the film Patton where Patton is standing opposite the Russian general, his counterpart, the Soviet counterpart, and the translator is there. And Patton says something to the translator to the effect of, "You tell this son of a gun," in stronger language, "I have no interest in having a goddamn drink with him." And the translator says, sir, General Patton, there's no way I can say this to this guy. And Patton says, "Say it to him exactly the way that I said it." And he says it, and there's this moment of huge tension, and then it it breaks because the Russian, of course, smiles and realizes this is one soldier talking to another soldier. That's how they talk to each other. So it was this great. Yeah, sometimes you got to neg a guy.
Right. It's true. It's true. Right.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So he's got Hollywood going on, but he never stops. He never stops working on the stuff he wants to. 1932, Light in August comes out, and his sort of credibility is just rising by this. I heard you talking a little bit. I heard when I managed to get myself put together over here, I heard you talking a little bit about Light in August. This is one I've never read, Aaron, so I don't know.
It's a crazy book, and it's one that Faulkner in later interviews, there's a great book of transcriptions of interviews called Faulkner in the University, and this is when he had his cushy UVA writer-in-residence job toward the end of the 50s. This is after the Nobel. He's several Pulitzers in and all this kind of stuff. But Faulkner would confuse a character from Light in August named Joanna Burden with the woman who lies dying in As I Lay Dying, which is Addie Bundren. So he would not always be able to keep these people straight himself. Light in August, it centers around a character named Joe Christmas. And Joe Christmas is he's the stranger who comes to town, right? So he comes to Jefferson, and he has this fascinating backstory and is a man of violence and a man that some people are drawn to. And he falls into a love affair with this woman, Joanna Burden. And the central fact about Joe Christmas is that, this is a quote from Christmas, he tells Joanna Burden, "I think I might have a little black blood in me." Right? So, and this is
a Faulkner theme too, right? Like
it is a Faulkner theme. This is a big thing. But with Christmas, he deals with the whole idea of quote unquote, this is not a kosher term now, but it was an obsession in the South, the idea of quote miscegenation, right? This is a kind of intellectual quote miscegenation, right? Because Christmas doesn't even know if he's African American or if he has African American genealogy or lineage. He has no idea. But just the idea, right? Just the suggestion that I think I might have, all the conditionals, right? I think I might have a little black blood in me. And just the idea of that in his mind is enough to completely destroy him, right? That is how volatile race is in America. It doesn't even have to be real. It doesn't even have to be, right? It can just, the introduction of and this is a boy who could have chosen to believe, oh, well, if I think I might, I also might not. So,
well, this continues to this day. I think with Elizabeth Warren being the most famous example, there's this kind of strange racial dynamic in America that really only exists in this country. It's unique to this country.
That's right.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Faulkner was there first with that. I mean, I really hammer this with my students because they want to see him sometimes as a biracial character. And Faulkner plays with that, with his descriptions of him, where he plays with certain things that are tropes of portrayals of African-American men, but then he'll pull away and you're like, okay, I don't know. Ultimately, it doesn't matter in the spiritual and larger human sense, but for this character's psychology, just the notion, just the thought that this is part of him spins him out of control and spins other people around him out of control.
Yeah. And, and I think it's Faulkner. It was interesting to Faulkner, not only because it was sort of going on around him, but the old colonel, his great grandfather had a child with one of his slaves, and there were apparently at times people who speculated if at some point in Faulkner's own lineage there had been an instance of miscegenation. And so you wonder if Faulkner at some point had a little bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it a crisis, but had some questions and some doubts himself about his own personal lineage, whether he had a drop of that black blood in him and what the implications of that were.
It's very interesting.
Yeah,
there's this devastating moment. Faulkner really, he shades the race thing down so close. Like he plays with every subtle nuance that I can think of. And there's toward the end of the book, I won't do spoilers, but several catastrophic things happen. And it just kind of brings the whole town down on this one house where Christmas has been. The sheriff shows up. There's a mob. There's all this stuff going on. And the sheriff, trying to figure out what is going on, says something that will strike our ears very offensive, but says something that's culturally true. He comes to the scene, he looks around, and then he says, "Get me a," and he uses the N-word. Now, not a man of a particular name, right? Get me any N-word.
Right.
And they seize hold of the nearest, some poor African-American man. But that man, what the sheriff understands is he is plugged into a network culturally that is closed to the Caucasian members of that community. Right. And so there's a flip side to the power dynamic, which by shutting out African-American members of this community, they've also shut out their back to the internet metaphor. They've put a firewall up, and it goes both ways. Like they can't, they shut out the other, but then they can't hear the other, and they can't know what the other knows.
Right.
It's really interesting.
No, that is definitely going from that intellectually is going much deeper than like there's racism and it's bad.
Oh my gosh!
It's like
absolutely,
know what I mean? It's going much deeper layers and levels of that.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. That's one I at some point I'm gonna circle back and read that late in August, because in the description I read in the biography, it definitely sounded like one I had missed.
It's one of the greats. It is definitely It's good that you have. It's great to have these great novels waiting for you, right? You're like, well, haven't got to it yet, but I know this is one of the, it's a banger, man. It's another banger.
Right. Interesting. So just getting back a little bit to the timeline, Blight in August comes out 1932. 1933, Estelle and Faulkner have a daughter, Jill. Jill lives, everybody. She's, by all accounts, a wonderful woman and lives well into adulthood. Also around this time, Faulkner gets, one thing we should mention about this, just to keep the marriage between Estelle and Faulkner alive. Faulkner claimed that after Jill was born, Estelle would never sleep with him again. So and that's rough.
Sure.
To be and you're making a bunch of money and you're taking care of people and you're out in Hollywood and all of these things, and your wife won't even touch you. Now that this would lead to not that long after I think a year after Jill was born, Faulkner meets Meta Carpenter, who's an assistant to the director Howard Hawks. She's about 10 years younger than Faulkner, very charming, very pretty, and they fall into an extended fling that would be sort of on and off for years. Whenever he was in Hollywood, basically. One note I want to hit real quick, because after Light in August, a little bit of money's coming in. Faulkner gets really into flying planes. He's sponsoring air shows and that sort of thing. It was just a fascination of his. And from out of this, he wrote what most critics say is his worst book, which is a book called Pylon, which is I think it was about it was about pilots who were they were like barnstormers who would like travel around the South doing barnstorming, and generally it's panned, but I had never read it. I don't have an opinion.
It's weird. It's a weird book, and it's Faulkner's at his worst when he's doing a comedy, and that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It seemed like nobody liked it, basically.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So he writes Light in August, then he writes this clunker of Pylon, and then the next book is Absalom. Right.
That's the one.
That's the one. And he's writing this. He's writing Absalom. I think it's worthwhile to note he's waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. He's in Hollywood when he writes a lot of it, at least finishes it. He's waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, writing Absalom for 3 or 4 hours, and then he's going in to work on scripts all day, which is just impressive in my opinion.
He's on fire. He's completely on fire.
And I want to talk about Absalom, but there's one sort of narrative story note I want to hit here about Faulkner's life. He's working on Absalom. He's also working on this screenplay called The Road to Glory, which is sort of the next step up in the Hollywood success he's had so far. And when he's finished with both Absalom and The Road to Glory, he goes on to one of his most epic benders. And this is the first time, because he's getting a little older. I mean, this is he's 39 years old. He's been drinking heavy since he was a teenager. This one actually lands him in the sanatorium in Bahia near Oxford. And this is a place that the sanitarium in Bahia is a place that Faulkner will come to know extremely well in the back half of his life. We'll get to it. So he's got Absalom. Aaron, I just read this book last year actually, and I had tried to read it years ago and sort of maybe got distracted or didn't get it or something, and then read it last year and was just blown away. So give us your
absolutely
your take on Absalom.
This is my pick for the great American novel that everyone's perennially searching for and can't seem to locate. And there are books in this at this level, right? I think Moby Dick is one of these books. It's a clear candidate for great American novel. It is a brilliant, amazing, maddening, crazy, great book. I would say Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is one of these books. I would say Don DeLillo's Underworld is one of these books. I'd say Toni Morrison's Beloved is one of these books.
Playing the hits here, Aaron.
Yeah, Colson.
You and I got the same list pretty much.
Yeah. Colson, Whitehead's The Underground Railroad is one of these books.
All right, I would that then.
Lolita is one of these books, and even though it's written by a European writer, it couldn't be more American. I think Dennis Johnson's Tree of Smoke is one of these books. I think
Tree of Smoke is so good. Oh,
it's incredible. It's an incredible book. It's incredible writing. I would also put, this is a newer book, but I put Philip Meyer's The Sun into this camp. I think that is a book that keeps pace right with all those books. I do think Absalom ends up because of its Shakespearean notes, and because of when it's written and how it's written, because of how it's tied in with issues
it's difficult too. Of those books you listed,
that's right.
Other than Moby Dick, it's probably the most difficult, I would say.
Absolutely. No, it's a challenging book, and Faulkner does not do anything to assist the reader. He assumes, like, if you're down with this, every quirk that I have as a writer, every idiosyncrasy, I'm going to throw at you. The book is essentially this. It's essentially Redneck Citizen Kane is what it essentially is.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But on a rural scale and in a way that speaks to Southern history. So it is about a man, and there are numerous people telling the story about this man. This man in the present of the book, which is Quentin Thompson from Sound and the Fury. He killed himself in the Sound and the Fury, but this is a sort of weird prequel. So Quentin Thompson is one of the narrators and becomes an actor in this local legend. There was a man named Thomas Sutpen who was a big deal in the history of Jefferson, Mississippi. First came to Jefferson in 1833, right? And Quentin in 1910 is drawn back into the mystery of this man who he's heard of all of his life, who he has opinions about and has heard stories about and will make stories about. And Thomas Sutpen, the local legend, his story is essentially this. Once upon a time in 1833, this stranger named Thomas Sutpen rolls into Jefferson, Mississippi, with a wagon filled with African-American slaves, unlike any of the African-American slaves that are in Mississippi. So what we find out later is that they're Haitian and that Sutpen has brought them with him. And he proceeds to live with these other men naked in the woods, having acquired is also attenuated here, having hoodwinked a Native American tribe member out of 100 square miles of land outside Jefferson. Sutpen and the enslaved men with him build this mansion out in the middle of the swamps, and this whole plantation comes to life. And then once Sutpen has his mansion, he hangs out and it's kind of a big hunting palace. It's like a TikTok house in LA, only with hunting and deer and alligator, right? And so, he's out there doing that. And then one day he wakes up and he goes and gets windows, furniture, and finds a wife in the way that he would select everything else he's ever selected, right? So he goes to church, sits down. The next day he's at this woman's named Ellen, this Coldfield. He's at her home proposing a big partnership with her father, who's a local merchant, right? And so through various lenses and different people. So we start off and Quentin is listening to an old woman named Rosa Coldfield, who was Thomas Sutpen's sister-in-law. And she is telling Quentin this story and wants him to do something for her connected to this old house. And then Quentin gets home and he's on vacation from Harvard, right? So he talks to his father. And his father starts telling him some things about Thomas Sutpen, and that's chapter 2. And then chapter 3, well, here are some things that your grandfather told me about Thomas Sutpen. And then all of a sudden, Quentin's up at Harvard, and he's getting letters from his father, and his father is continuing the story and then telling him, okay, here's what just happened to Rosa Coldfield. And then Quentin and his dorm mate, a kid named Shreve McCaslin, also a freshman at Harvard, they begin to, and the most bravura passage of Absalom that goes on several chapters, they begin to fill in all the blanks, all the stuff they don't know. So Quentin will tell a while, and then all of a sudden Shreve, who's from Canada, will pick up and start telling. And Shreve knows none of this at this point, but everything he says and everything Quentin says has the weight of authority. And they'll even say, oh, stop, let me play for a while, right? And then they'll go on with Sutpen's story. And at that point, as a reader, you're like, okay, all of this is washing over me with the feeling of truth and legend and myth. I don't know how much of what I'm hearing is accurate. And in fact, how much have I heard so far about Sutpen is accurate? What are the nobles and what are the not nobles? So in addition to being about slavery, race, acquiring, quote unquote, land from Native Americans in ways that amount to theft, and all these big questions of America, it's also about storytelling and history and how we know all of this, right? So it combines all of that thematic, amazing, quintessentially American stuff with this narrational strategy. That's a complete tour de force. I mean, as a performance, you know, as a writer, you're just watching this thing happen. You're like, good grief.
Oh, it's
so, yeah.
It's stunning. It is one of, you know, there's been a handful of books, and some of them, the ones you've listed, where I've thought, man, I can't do that.
Oh my gosh.
You know, I'm pretty cocky about these sorts of things.
It's amazing.
So
it's amazing.
It's stunning. It's amazing that one person could kind of come up with this, and it is I mean, I strongly recommend it to anybody, but it's one of those books that I have that people ask me, and I'm sure you guys get this too, will ask you for book recommendations.
Right.
You know, and I don't know that I've ever recommended that one to anybody. That's just sort of passingly in, because it's just like, I don't know if most people are going to, because it is difficult. It's if you're not comfortable with not knowing what's going on, what's true, what's false, being able to connect the dots and all of that, it's going to be a challenging read. To me, I found it absolutely compelling. Once I settled into its groove, and like you said, let it wash over me, I was, page after page, was just stunned by the deftness and the language and the
absolutely.
It's
Faulkner
really an
builds this thing on very genre.
Mm-hmm.
On a very genre trellis. It's a detective story.
Right. I was going to say that.
Even a murder mystery, right?
Right.
And so that is deep structure is that. But then, of course, I've picked out a little passage from if you want me to. Okay. So this is, I'll just read a page, right? Yeah. And in this section, just to give some context, this is Quentin and Shreve, his roommate, talking about Thomas Sutpen. And in this particular section, this is something that has been passed on from Quentin's grandfather, who's known as General Thompson, and who was Sutpen's friend, right? So when we think about narrative authority, we think, okay, this is a guy Quentin's related to. This is my grandfather. He knew Sutpen and was his personal friend, and Sutpen divulged things to him that he didn't divulge to anyone else. Sutpen's only friend in this town that becomes increasingly hostile to the Sutpens. So this is Quentin talking, channeling his grandfather, who is in turn telling about something Sutpen told him. And in this passage, this is Sutpen's origin story. And so we find out, oh, wow, Sutpen came out of Virginia back before there was a West Virginia and a regular Virginia, before the Civil War. And he was born up in the Appalachian Mountains. And this is just a passage where Faulkner shows the Sutpen family, you know, who are completely backwoods. And I believe hillbilly is the actual correct term, like total Appalachian hillbillies, right?
Yeah.
Up in the woods. And they kind of just fall down the mountain over a period of months and end up in the tidewater. They fell into it, the whole family, returned to the coast from which the first Sutpen had come, tumbled head over heels back to tidewater by sheer altitude, elevation, and gravity, as if whatever slight hold the family had on the mountain had broken. He said, he being Sutpen, he said something to grandfather about his mother dying about that time, and how his pap said she was a fine, wearying woman and that he would miss her, and something about how it was the wife that had got his father even that far west. And now the whole passel of them, from the father through the grown daughters down to the one who couldn't even walk yet, slid back down out of the mountain, skating in a kind of accelerating and sloven and inert coherence, like a useless collection of flotsam on a flooded river, moving by some perverse automotivation, such as inanimate objects sometimes show, backward against the very current of the stream, across the Virginia plateau and into the slack lowlands about the mouth of the James River. He didn't know why they moved or didn't remember the reason if he ever knew it, whether it was optimism, hope in his father's breast, or nostalgia, since he didn't know just where his father had come from, whether from the country to which they returned or not, or even if his father knew, remembered, wanted to remember and find it again. He didn't know whether some traveler had told him of some easy place or time, some escape from hardship of getting food and keeping warm in the mountain way, or if perhaps somebody his father knew once, or who knew his father once and remembered him, happened to think about him, or someone kin to him who had tried to forget him and couldn't quite do it, had sent for him, and he had obeyed, going not for the promised job, but for the ease, having faith, perhaps, in the blood kinship to evade the labor, if it was kinship, and in his own inertia, and in whatever gods had watched over him this far. And that's a sentence.
Whew.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's...
You see people, you see young writers try to mimic this a lot.
Right.
And it just doesn't always work. It very rarely works. Yeah.
Right. It has to be the way you think, right? That's not an affect. Like Faulkner didn't take that from someone. This is who he was. This is how he told stories, right?
Yeah. No, and that's... Oof. Yeah, I had thoughts about his relationship to some of the other modernists, and you know, you come across criticism of Faulkner, and they want to talk about it being stream of consciousness, and you relate that to Virginia Woolf and things like that. And there is a sense in which it is stream of consciousness, but it's like it isn't necessarily how most people's brains works. It's almost like I don't know. It's the stream of consciousness of God or something. It's
right.
And not to put him on a godlike status, but there is this perspective on time that is absolutely, it's unparalleled in anything that I've read. So
there's something about the deity there, though. Like when I start talking about him, like I don't want to put him on the level of God either, but there is something like a sacred text. And
right.
I think it, to some degree, I do actually think it has something to do. I think this is what's called parataxis, where you use and that's that Old Testament biblical, and they came down from this mountain, and then they saw them upon the floodplain, and they reached out to them, and they said, there's something about that rhetorically that is really powerful and really stirs up some deep stuff for those of us raised in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you see Cormac McCarthy using that.
Oh my gosh,
for sure, right? Yeah, interesting how that one little word can at least kick that vibe off, if not fully maintain it. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so he's writing that, and he's also, you know, at the same time in his own life is cranking out Hollywood stuff.
It's amazing.
It's kind of crazy that he can be doing. To me, it's just insane that he could be doing both of those things at the same time.
And a third component. Yeah. And a third component.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, we should tell, like, things have flipped now. If you're a short story writer, you have to support your short story habit through novels. And Faulkner, this entire time, is writing short stories to support, like, today you have to write novels to support your short stories. He's writing short stories to support his novels because the short story is a lucrative form that has a big market. Saturday Evening Post and Collier's and all these magazines. So he's making really good money and working out some of the ideas that he'll install in his novels. Absalom starts off as a short story called Wash.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, at that time you could make several $100 in those days, several $100, $1,000 for a short story, you know.
Absolutely.
It was significant money.
Fitzgerald sort of famously wrecked himself on those magazine stories, is what people sort of said. Right. But he was doing it to support Zelda and their crazy lifestyle and everything.
Yeah. So one thing so getting into the biography a little bit, and Absalom is in a lot of ways maybe the high point of his literary output. I mean, you could put
Absolutely.
out almost anything after that, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard
No
to
doubt.
catch
It's
that
all
flame
downhill.
again. Yeah, no matter what you do. So he's in Hollywood. He's back and forth between Oxford and Hollywood. Now, the Hollywood stuff he still has to keep doing for money. There's a thing about why he needed so much money, because I was very curious. He's making this, $1,000 a week or whatever, which is like 10 grand or whatever it is in modern time, and he's still kind of broke. And I was, trying to figure out what's going on. And in the biography, you start to learn that he was taking on all kinds of, so when he married Estelle, she had 2 kids. He took them under his wing. He was financially responsible for them. He had his daughter. He had the staff of Roanoke. His brother Dean had died in an airplane crash, which Faulkner felt terrible about because he'd encouraged Dean to take up flying. So Faulkner took over financial responsibility for his brother Dean's kids. He eventually, when Faulkner's dad would die, he would take over financial responsibility for his mother, who would live almost to the end of Faulkner's life. So he's just taking in, and he's also not very good with money either. And he's got this farm, and he's got, he wasn't shy about buying a boat or a car or a horse or, a month's supply of booze or whatever. Right. So it's kind of all through this time in Hollywood, writing Absalom, he's basically on the razor's edge of being broke all the time, at least in his own mind.
He's like Johnny Depp.
Yeah, right. Like, it doesn't matter how much money you make. You're always kind of broke.
You hear those stories. It's so crazy of these people who they have money managers. And I think part of it is that they have this trust that gets established. Then they just wave their hands. They don't care. I'm hanging out with Hunter S. Thompson. I'm hanging out with the Rolling Stone guys. Money. And then before you know it, you're hose. Yeah. Wild. Right. No bueno. Right.
Yeah. No good. So also in these years, the Absalom years, he's got this relationship with Meta that I talked about, and this is a thing that he does when he's in Hollywood. He sleeps around with Meta, and they go to dinner, and it's they're almost like boyfriend girlfriend when he's in Hollywood. At one point, though, on one of his trips to Hollywood, Estelle and the family end up coming with him.
Oh damn!
Yeah. So let me just read this little passage. About, and I just want to give you more color on the Estelle relationship. So this is one of his trips to Hollywood. I want to say this is in 36 or 38. Estelle agreed to these arrangements, and they soon settled into life in Hollywood. Unfortunately, Faulkner hated the project at hand, a film called The Last Slaver, about the ruins of slavery in the South. He was also miserable with Estelle looking over his shoulder and therefore not being able to spend any time with Meta. As often happened in difficult situations, he took earnestly to the bottle, as did Estelle. On one rare occasion when he and Estelle went to a cocktail party at Joel Sayers' house, she got so tipsy that the house quietly suggested that Faulkner take her home and return to the party by himself. Faulkner did, but he came back with horrible scratches on his cheek and neck, explaining that Estelle had resisted his attempt to return to the party. Another time he came into the studio with a huge purple lump on his forehead. "What happened?" David Hampstead said. "I was just reading a magazine and she came at me with a croquet mallet," Faulkner explained. Yeah, tempestuous. Yeah. Yeah. So his marriage is always a problem. She may have not known about Meta, but she certainly knew about another relationship that he would have some years later with a woman, Joan. Oh, I'm missing her name. Another much, much younger woman who is an aspiring writer that he's had a sort of ongoing affair with and would meet up with whenever he could. Now, this is the thing. So I want to give like a little retrospective at about the year 1944, the work that he's put out since, say, 27, 28. He's got this like 15-year period where he's written written stuff for Hollywood, obviously. He's written literally dozens of short stories, but he's also written Sanctuary. He's written Sound and the Fury. He's written As I Lay Dying, Light in August, Pylon, Absalom. I feel like I'm missing one in that period, but right. He's cranked out basically almost a book a year in this time period. So
amazing.
Boozing all the while, working in Hollywood all the while, trying to maintain a farm, et cetera, et cetera. But by 1944, there's some dispute about this. By 1944, I think only one of his books are in print. Something I read said you could still buy his books in hardcover. They were still in print in hardcover. I don't necessarily understand the publishing world at that time, but the legend is he was basically out of print in 1944.
That's what I've always heard. That's what I've always known. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, so the question then is, well, okay, how did he sort of come back into prominence? It was really the effort of a book reviewer named Malcolm Cowley, who always sort of loved Faulkner and had always written positively about him, who suggested the idea of putting together a book called The Portable Faulkner. And this came out in 1945. Cowley wrote an introduction to it to basically explain why Faulkner was such a big deal and why you should pay attention to him. And then I believe how it worked, and I don't have a copy of the Portable Faulkner. I think what he did in the Portable Faulkner was he arranged sections, selected excerpts of Faulkner's novels.
That's right.
So that they ran chronologically in order, not in the order they were written, but so that they chronologically in terms of event, is my understanding. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So this was sort of a reintroduction of Faulkner to the literary world, and it went over huge. It was a pretty big success when it came out. It drew a lot of attention back to him. It even made people who had reviewed his books poorly kind of reevaluate him and put him sort of in the proper status that he should have been. And so this is kind of his resurgence. I mean, other writers hadn't forgot about him. Camus and Sartre and all the people in France and the folks in South America, they all still kind of knew about him. But this was his sort of reintroduction to America. And this is where we get him basically on track toward the Nobel Prize.
Right.
So I wanted to read.
And the French guys, right? Like Camus and Sartre, they're saying, hey, this existentialism stuff that we've been talking about, this guy's been doing this since 1929.
Right.
Like this is a major guy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they were, when he did end up going to France a little bit later, he was at an event where Camus and Sartre and Bouvier were there. They were like clamoring for his attention. They were like
amazing.
They were like fanning out to him.
That's amazing.
Right. And he didn't really even know who they were. He would later be, I guess he was pretty fond of Camus. Camus would end up putting on Faulkner's play Requiem for a Nun in the late 50s, and it was apparently pretty successful in Europe. And Faulkner was adequately distressed when he found out that Camus had died in a car accident. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship. They're in my mind, they couldn't be in the literary world. They couldn't be more separate, but there's really some strong overlaps. Also, one thing worth noting is, and I don't want to totally miss the Hemingway stuff. We're going to do a Hemingway episode eventually, so I don't want to spend too much time there. But there's this great anecdote about Malcolm Cowley told Faulkner this. This is from the One Matchless Time biography, and this is Malcolm Cowley in a letter to Faulkner. Did I tell you about the story I heard from Sartre about Hemingway drunk in Paris insisting that Faulkner was better than he was, he meaning Hemingway? Hemingway wrote me a long, rambling, lonely letter complaining that writing was a lonely trade and there was no one to talk to about it. He said, Faulkner, has the most talent of anybody, but hard to depend on because he goes on writing after he is tired and seems as though he never threw away the worthless. I would have been happy just to have managed him. Which managed him, for Hemingway meant like meet him in competition, basically.
That's very interesting. Hemingway, and I think it's an Immovable Feast.
He's reflecting on Faulkner, and he says that, you know, people think I don't like him, or people think I'm critical of his work, and I've always thought he's very good.
Right.
And then he says something kind of like negative about him, of course, right, to balance it out. But he definitely tips his cap to him.
Yeah, Faulkner, or Hemingway's opinion, from what I can gather, seems to be that Faulkner was as talented or more talented than anybody else. And the only issue he had was, kind of what I just read, that Faulkner never knew when to clarify and never knew when to rein himself in.
Very interesting.
But the talent-wise was better than anybody.
Yeah, so sort of maybe like Faulkner missed the edit sober part. Right. Right. Trump edit sober. Yeah, there's a certain what would you call it? Like an indulgent quality to some of Faulkner's writing.
Oh yeah,
that
absolutely.
That's
true. And I think it's fantastic, but definitely contrary to Hemingway's mode. Largely.
Yeah. I want to read. So since we're talking about this, I'm going to talk about a little bit of a beef that they had. So Faulkner had, I think this is when he was meeting with a class at Ole Miss, I believe. This was later. This would have been in the late 40s, I believe. So I'll just read this real quickly because I think this gives an interesting picture of the Faulkner-Hemingway relationship and everything. In this session, Faulkner mentioned to one class that Hemingway, quote unquote, lacked courage, although his remarks were not really meant to demean Hemingway. He was simply saying that Hemingway didn't risk failure. He's talking about Hemingway being a perfectionist, basically. He explained that Faulkner explained that he liked Thomas Wolfe better than Hemingway because Wolfe had tried so hard and failed magnificently. Now, news of this remark made its way into an article published in the New York Herald Tribune. Much to his chagrin, Hemingway had been forwarded a copy while he was in Cuba. As might be expected, he found the remark about his lack of courage distressing and asked his friend Brigadier General C.T. Lanham to write to Faulkner and tell him about Hemingway's actual performance under fire during the war. Faulkner responded immediately, without taking back what he had said or clarifying the context of his remarks. "I'm sorry of this damn stupid thing," he said in a letter. "I've believed for years that the human voice has caused all human ills, and I thought I had broken myself of talking. Maybe this will be my valedictory lesson." This painful episode for Faulkner suggests, wrongly, that Faulkner didn't admire Hemingway. He did. It was just that Hemingway had not gone out on a limb as Faulkner had, risking bad taste, overwriting, dullness. That is how he explained it to General Lanham, adding that he felt genuinely vexed that his comments had caused Hemingway discomfort. Right, so Hemingway took it real personal. Anybody would say he lacked courage, right? And it's not physical courage that Faulkner was talking about. You know, it was sort of literary courage.
Well, that's funny because
Hemingway.
I mean, well, we don't have to go too far into it, but I could see. I mean, Hemingway's sort of genius, his unique contribution to my mind was bringing the quality of almost like newspaper writing. Elevating it and making fine literature accessible to, I suppose you would say, the everyday American. He himself said, "I taught the world how to speak American." Whereas Faulkner, of course, went in a completely different direction in terms of the ornateness of the writing and the. So I could see how they might misunderstand one another.
They were coming from very different perspectives. Yeah. So let me give you a last Hemingway note. I don't know if you can hear me. We glitched there for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is when Hemingway died in 1961, and as we all know, he committed suicide. And I felt like this is maybe Faulkner closing out his sort of relationship and opinion of Hemingway. The news of Hemingway's death on July 2nd, 1961 came as a shock to Faulkner. He guessed immediately that it was suicide. He was right. Hemingway had shot himself, blah, 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 blah. I shouldn't blah, 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 blah that, but we know the story there. Faulkner had heard all of this from Malcolm Cowley, and he sympathized. By comparison, Faulkner had done very well. When asked at a public forum if he thought Hemingway's death was accidental, Faulkner replied, "No, I don't. I think that Hemingway was too good a man to be a victim of accidents. Only the weak are victims of accidents unless a house falls on them. I think that was a deliberate pattern which he followed, just as all his work was a deliberate pattern. I think that every man wants to be at least as good as what he writes. And I'm inclined to think that Ernest felt that at this time, this was the right thing in grace and dignity to do. So, yeah.
And his phone was tapped by the FBI, by the way.
Yes, it was. Yeah,
It was,
and he had not one but 2 rounds of electroshock therapy here in Minnesota.
Tragic.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting, and we're going. I mean, we're 2.5 hours into this, so maybe we'll speed up some of the end of this. Faulkner also underwent electroshock therapy.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah. Well, the boozing got so bad, they didn't know what to do with him. So, real quick, I just want to hit this note, and then we'll talk about the last decade or so. He wins the Nobel Prize in 1949, gives one of the most stirring Nobel Prize speeches among the people who've given them, and it's recorded. And is now sort of an international kind of literary celebrity. By the way, he gave the Nobel Prize pretty drunk. He gave that speech pretty drunk, though it comes off masterfully. So after that, he's kind of touring the world a little bit. He goes to Sweden for that. He goes to Europe to talk to some people. He goes to Japan at one point in the 50s to do like a literary conference that's like based on him. And at one point he gets so drunk he can't show up to the honorary dinner.
Oh no.
He's and it gets kind of ugly in the 50s, honestly. The Nobel Prize happens. He makes a deliberate effort. He doesn't want to undergo what he referred to as the Nobel curse, which is like you get the Nobel Prize and then you're done, which he'd seen happen to other people. But he kind of, the drinking, so he gets a Nobel, and now he doesn't have to go to Hollywood anymore. He doesn't have to beg, borrow, steal for money anymore. He's pretty much taken care of. His books are selling well, both domestically and internationally, and the Nobel Prize money itself is it's significant. He has Aaron, you alluded to his post at the University of Virginia. He's got that, but there's this period after the Nobel Prize where I counted in the biography between the Nobel Prize in 1949 and his death in 1962. I counted 11 times where he went to the hospital or the sanitarium.
Oh my gosh.
Either to dry out or to get he had injured his back several times because not only was he drinking, he was riding horses constantly and he was falling off. It sounds like, if you read the biography, it sounds like he fell off the horse every time he got on the horse.
He should have got on the wagon.
Yeah, he should have got on the wagon.
Yikes!
Yeah. He's fallen off the horse and breaking ribs. He broke his back. Minor break, but still broke his back. He hit his head once so hard, and this is when he was like into his 50s. He hits his head so hard that he has memory loss, falling off a horse. He started when he was in Virginia. He started getting involved in the very aristocratic fox hunting community, and he really liked it. And he wanted to improve his riding a little bit. And even though he'd been riding horses for years, he went to a teacher, and the teacher described him as being, quote unquote, all nerve riding a horse. So basically, he was completely reckless on a horse. He'd jump things and turn and push the horse, and he just didn't. He wasn't trying to not fall. You know what I'm saying? Right. So, and he did this right up to the end. Right up to the end, he's getting drunk. Not as bad as some of the early, like the lean years in the early 40s and the Hollywood years, but he never stopped. There's never a Faulkner got it together and stopped. There's just a gradual physical decline, and not even gradual, really. There's a while after 1952, he inflames this back injury, and they put him on Seconal.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah, so he gets kind of somewhat hooked on Seconal. He has a seizure in 1952, probably from drinking on Seconal. And it's 1952. It's actually after Seconal where they end up giving him electroshock therapy at the West Hill Sanitarium in the Bronx. So yeah, it got dark. It's not clear. He also didn't like he had a complicated relationship to the fame and the attention. I think like anybody who writes, they want to be acknowledged, and not even, I don't know if acknowledged is the right word. To spend all that time and effort and mental energy on doing something and have it come out and have people tell you it's good, you got to be some kind of enlightened Zen Buddhist for that to not mean something to you. You know,
to the level of the Nobel Prize as well. It does not get bigger. Right. So I think on one level he felt, validated and that sort of thing. But on another level, he didn't like having to talk to people all the time. I mean, I think he's a deep introvert. I don't think you can be a 6-hour-a-day novelist and not be introverted. Right. And so all the attention was very difficult for him. He would drink so he could kind of lubricate himself into the situations, and then he would drink if they went well. He would drink if they went poorly, and it was sort of he had no other mechanism for taking care of himself. It didn't seem like, to take care of his sort of somewhat delicate psyche, other than to drink, and maybe write.
So there's this weird thing, right? So he gives this Nobel Prize speech in 1949, and this famous quote, I believe that man shall not only endure, I believe he will prevail. Yeah. And it's got this kind of weird verbiage about, until the last ding dong of doom and all this kind of stuff, right? And then he writes a novel called A Fable that comes out in 1955. And it wins the Pulitzer National Book Award, and it's the Christ story, but set during World War I and the false armistice, when these French soldiers just walked out of the trenches and kind of rebelled. They wouldn't go over the wall anymore. They left. And the Christ figure is a French corporal who leads this revolt. And there's a scene in the novel where a French general takes this corporal in hand and leads him out to this precipice, and they overlook the battlefield. And the French general is the Satan figure tempting Christ, right? And the French general goes on this long speech, and here's the very end of the speech. Oh, man will survive because he has that in him which will endure even beyond the ultimate. Worthless, tideless rock freezing slowly in the last red and heatless sunset, because already the next star in the blue immensity of space will be already clamorous with the uproar of his debarkation, his puny and inexhaustible and immortal voice still talking, still planning, and there too after the last ding-dong of doom has rung and died, there will be still one sound more, his voice. Oh, I don't fear man. I do better. I respect and admire him. I am 10 times prouder of that immortality which he does possess than ever he of that heavenly one of his delusion, because man and his folly will not only endure, they will prevail. So Faulkner puts his Nobel Prize speech in the mouth of the satanic figure and then shows what man enduring and prevailing will mean. And he describes this treeless, mountainless, concrete sphere. The earth is transformed into basically the Death Star.
Whoa.
That's to take your most affirmative, life-affirming, it's Faulkner's Nobel Prize speech is quoted all the time as being this great humanist statement. And to make it that dark, that is the art of darkness.
Whoa, that is the art of darkness.
Well, it reminds me of Paths of Glory.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, the Kubrick film.
Very much so.
I didn't know this about. I have not read A Fable.
Wow. It's weird. It's a wild book, but when I got to that passage, I was like, whoa, what the fuck is going on here?
Right. That is the art of darkness right there. I mean, and so is it that his vision changed, or that's what he was saying in the Nobel Prize speech all like, yeah.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
that reminds me, that move of those two things, it's on parallel to me to in the sort of the way it's quoted to Nietzsche's God is dead, right? And everybody leaves off the back half of it, which is
Right.
and we have killed him, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Whew. Man. So yeah, a lot of wow, there's a lot going on in Faulkner's head, man. That's
No doubt, dude.
Jeez. So yeah, he's working on that. And Fable was my understanding, unlike some of his other stuff that was written very rapidly, Fable was something that took him a long time, a lot of kind of false starts, and wasn't sure what he was doing and starting over, and I think is the one. Now, this was the one that he wrote all of the notes on the wall, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh. So I've been to his house. I've been to Roanoke, his home, and I've been in his office. The curator took me in and took away the plexiglass barricade. I went in, went through his stuff to the extent that it's respectful to do so. And in his office, a fable is split into chapters based on the days of the week. And this is the week of this false armistice, right? So there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And on the walls, Faulkner has painted in red paint these huge columns. And at the top, he writes Monday. And it's like a plot synopsis, right? And he did the whole office on two walls of the office, and even the back of the door. You have to close the door to see what's going on. And that is the last chapter, which is called Tomorrow. And yeah, it's real crazy stuff, but because it's Faulkner, they have lacquered over the walls, so all of that is protected, right? That's his scrawling on the walls will be there as long as that house is.
Right. Yeah. Oof. You wonder if he knew. That's almost like a second book, those notes, in a way, right? It's almost like I imagine there's been academic papers and things written on what you can find on those walls.
Well, it's like the doubleness. It's, again, like a lot of these guys are double guys, right? So Jill Faulkner, his daughter, is complaining, since the Nobel. And she's like, Daddy, when are you going to dedicate a book to me? Daddy, when are you going to dedicate a book to me? And one day he looked at her and said, no one remembered Shakespeare's daughter either.
Oh, man.
Right?
Yeah,
okay.
that's dark.
However,
it's true, though.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean,
however, he dedicates a fable to Jill.
Okay.
So like, it's the doubleness, right? It's like he says to his daughter, which I was talking to Philip Meyer about this, and Meyer's like, well, she was kind of being a brat, though. I mean, what kind of person goes around saying, Daddy, when are you going to dedicate it?
Yeah,
so, I mean,
it's true.
It's a great little, I mean, that's a Faulkner nugget right there.
Yeah, that definitely is. So, yeah. So, I don't think there's too much after kind of a fable that I want to dig into too much. I mean, he 1962 comes around and some of the financial, it's interesting because not only does he not have to worry about finances anymore, but he doesn't have nearly as many burdens either. Miss Maud, his mother, has passed on. She died in 1960. All the kids are out of the house and kind of, married off and that sort of thing. So he's not taking care of them so much. And he's set up like a William Faulkner Foundation and those sorts of things. But and he writes one last book. I think he writes a fable, and then he writes The Reivers, which is a comedy.
Yeah. Really? Very light. And he wins the Pulitzer for it.
Yeah. So he wins the Pulitzer. Yeah, there was a point where like he could do no wrong in terms of the literary world, right? Like,
I swear, America, man, the way America treats its writers, right? We're late to the party. They, this guy's books are out of print. This dude's scratching around Hollywood trying to make ends meet. And then the French are like, do you know that you have a genius that you haven't really recognized? He gets the Nobel. I think he gets it before Hemingway, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, what he produces after that does have the Nobel curse on it. But now the establishment
having been educated about his genius, feels guilty, and so they give every book he writes, the National Book Award and the Pulitzer,
to try and make up for it. Yeah,
it's so like who we are, man. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. It's a strange. We have this super provincial problem with the arts in this country. For sure.
Yeah. So we'll kind of round it out here. July 3rd, 1962. His back's starting to bother him, and something's kind of off. And he's drinking, and he's likely on painkillers or Seconal at the same time. And then July 4th or 5th, he's confused, and he's confused and incoherent. And despite all of his crazy binges and all the times that Malcolm Cowley or some other friend had to pick him up off the floor and help him get dried out, the one thing about Faulkner was even when he was drunk, he was coherent. He was of such a mind that he could tell some exceedingly complicated story even when he was, blackout drunk. So when he was incoherent, it was concerning to people. July 5th, they check him into the sanitarium at Bahalia, which is the same place they checked him in the first time the alcohol really won. The first time it really got one up on him. He went to Bahalia. He checks into Bahalia July 5th, 1962. He's administered some painkillers and he's put to bed. He wakes up at 1:30 in the morning, cries out something, falls to the floor. And that's it. That's how he goes out, is at this sanitarium. Heart failure. They worked for 45 minutes to try and get him back to, bring him back. And it was over. He died at 65 years old, which isn't isn't incredibly young, especially for a guy who lived as hard as he lived, you factor that into the equation, lifelong smoker and drank as much as any one person drank, but the one good thing is he did sort of get his due. We've had some subjects, on this show who kind of died. Nobody really knew who they were by the time they were they left the earth, and Faulkner wasn't that way. He got his credit eventually from a neat disgrace to his family as a young man to internationally recognized. I wanted to say celebrity, but celebrity is not the word, right? There's respect on his name.
A living legend.
He was a living legend. And I will say, I've been to his grave there in Oxford, and these two marble, it's like the headstone, and then these two marble slabs also, right? He and Estelle buried 6 inches apart, right? Yeah. Their graves are at least. And I went there, I cleaned off his grave, but I noticed there on his headstone, those little like you see on planes or in hotels, those little mini bottles of liquor.
Yeah.
University of Mississippi students wander down there in the middle of the night and they uncork one for Bill and put little Jack Daniels bottles. So, he's still beloved by people who barely really get it, but they just know this is William Faulkner, man.
Right. Yeah. I want to do that. That's on my list of things to do. Go
Absolutely.
down there and have a little moonlight cocktail on his grave.
Faulkner would be all about it.
About it.
Yeah. Holy moly, that was a tour de force, boys.
It was
2 hours and 45 minutes of Faulkner, and we have more to come on After Dark. I can't believe there's anything more dark than the Honeymoon, the Suicide Honeymoon. That might actually have to be the show title. It might be William Faulkner's Suicide Honeymoon. I quite like that.
Ooh,
what do you think?
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, I like that better than the 2 cents was funny, but
it is funny.
Yeah, that was wild. But we're gonna do more on the After Dark episode. Again, you can get it on Patreon, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We are at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter. Brad, you're growing that following. One day at a time,
I'm trying, man. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying. I think people like the show, and we're going to keep cranking them out, man. So I've got plans. I got plans for the rest of the year. So
yeah. And we are
Awesome.
absolutely asking for you to engage. Tell us if you like the Faulkner episode. Tell us who you'd like us to do. We can't always do every single request, but there's no end to how many of these, potentially we want to do. So we want to go and do this podcast for 5 years, 7 years, however long it takes. We're going to finally get through everybody.
Yeah. Until we get the Nobel Prize in podcasting.
Oh,
that's great.
It's just a matter of time. Absolutely. The French love this podcast.
Right. That's right.
They love it.
They're like, are you
Aaron,
listening to this?
Way. Aaron, where can people find you again?
Man, then you can go to Amazon and buy some books. I'm not on
Yes.
social media. I'm hanging out here in Charlotte, North Carolina, teaching classes and writing books. So yeah, go to Amazon if you like the stuff I say. My books are different. So anyway,
And let's spell the last name for everyone. It's Gwyn, Aaron Gwyn, 2 A's. Aaron, Aaron Gwyn. And we're going to continue to do more time after dark. There's going to be an extra story. If you're interested, support the podcast again, Patreon. It's a very low barrier to entry. We're going to use the money in better ways than, Netflix. So please, support us. We have one final question, and I want to put it to our guest. Well, actually, you know what, Brad, I'll let you put it to Aaron.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Aaron, what would Faulkner be doing now in the foul year of our Lord 2021?
He would have a sweet deal at HBO Max, and he'd have this like series, this Byzantine, like it would be like The Wire, but set in Oxford. And it would be like, go back generations, and it would be slavery, and it would be Native American stuff, and the Cherokee and the land. And, it would be about like 15 seasons long, and every episode would be different lengths. There would be like 4-hour episodes, and some hours would be 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Or some episodes would be, it'd be totally crazy. He'd have a big HBO deal.
Yeah. HBO, get Gwyn in on this.
Yeah.
Faulkner's not alive.
Hire Gwyn to do a show about Faulkner.
Yeah.
That would be great, right? Who do you cast as Faulkner? Like Shia LaBeouf? Shia LaBeouf would be a great Faulkner.
He kind of would. Yeah, I know people don't like him, but that kid can act. He's probably
Holy moly, boys. We're coming up on 3 hours. Absolutely killer. And we still got some time to do on After Dark. I'm Kevin Kautzman with the great singular Aaron Gwyn. Aaron, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, guys.
So much.
Yeah.
That was great.
We're gonna keep talking here in a minute. And Brad, that was amazing, man. I really admire the work you put in there. Having Aaron on to augment it and to read in the way that he does was really fulfilling. And I have a plan to do on the next episode. I'm going to launch us into the world of Sarah Kane, the British playwright who herself had a suicide honeymoon, but actually followed through. So that one's going to be a dinger. But, and again, this is the Art of Darkness podcast. We hope you've enjoyed. If you can support the show through Patreon, please go do that. But you can also go and simply leave a review on iTunes or all the rest. Tell your friends.
Tell your friends. Yeah.
We really value our listeners. And all right, let's chat on the Art of the After Dark episode here now. Thanks, boys. Okay.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
That was great, man.
I'm going to practice my southern drawl on the After Dark episode. Maybe you don't want. I don't. Yeah. See you there.
Love it.